Hello, everyone. Every night we walk through the dust of history, every forgotten disaster, and tonight you're standing in the heart of Lisbon, moments before the earth decides to turn the city into a riddle of rubble and fire. The air smells of incense from the morning mass. The streets are alive with merchants shouting prices for figs and salted cod, and somewhere a church bell tolls a slow, lazy rhythm. You don't know it yet, but in minutes, this bell will be the last thing you hear before stone and sky trade places above your head. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you really like what I do here, and let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and what time it is. You walk past tiled houses with their windows flung wide to catch the late autumn light. Women lean out, gossiping as they hang linens that flap like sails in the gentle breeze. Somewhere a dog barks at nothing, then stops, tilting its head toward the ground, sensing something you can't. There's no rush in the air today. It's All Saints' Day, a holy day for rest, for prayer, and for gathering. Even the fishmongers speak in lower tones, as though the whole city has agreed to keep its voice soft. You think it will stay like this? You're wrong. The Tagus River glitters in the distance, reflecting the pale sun like a sheet of hammered silver. Cargo ships bob gently at the docks, their sails furled tight, waiting for a wind that will never come. A street performer plays a mournful tune on a Portuguese guitar, his fingers moving lazily over the strings. The song feels ancient, older than the cobblestones beneath your feet. People drop coins into his hat and nod in time with the music, unaware that in an hour, neither the song nor the hat will remain. You pass the grand facade of the Church of San Vicente, its white stone glowing against the blue sky. Inside, candles flicker in tall holders, casting dancing shadows on the carved saints above. The priest's voice echoes through the cavernous space, a steady drone that wraps around the congregation like a lullaby. A child fidgets in the pew, kicking his feet against the wood. His mother hushes him, smiling. You remember moments like this in your own life, when the world felt untouchable, as if nothing bad could breach the heavy doors. The baker on the corner pulls fresh loaves from his oven, the crusts crackling as they meet the cooler air. The scent wraps around you, warm and inviting, like a promise of safety. You take a piece of bread, still steaming, and bite into it. Across the street, a cat winds itself around a lamppost, blinking slow in the sunshine. Somewhere far away, you hear the faint clink of a blacksmith's hammer, each ring sharp and sure. It's a sound of work, of life moving forward, without any hint that in minutes it will all come crashing down. You pause at a market stall to admire bolts of cloth dyed in deep indigo and scarlet. The merchant runs his fingers over the fabric as though stroking the fur of a beloved animal. He tells you the dyes come from far-off lands, carried on ships that crossed oceans and fought storms. You think about how many hands touched this cloth before it reached Lisbon, how far it traveled just to end here, in this city that believes it will see another dawn. The merchant folds the fabric carefully, not knowing it will soon be nothing but ash in the wind. A group of children chase each other around the plaza, their laughter ringing like wind chimes. They dart between the legs of strolling couples, narrowly avoiding the baskets of produce balanced on women's hips. One boy stops to sip from the public fountain, water dripping down his chin. He wipes it away with the sleeve of his shirt, grinning before sprinting off again. It's a picture of pure joy, the kind you wish you could frame and keep forever. But joy, like buildings and bells, has a way of vanishing when the earth remembers it can move. You hear the bell again, this time faster, sharper, as if the wind has nudged it. A shadow passes over the street, but there are no clouds. You glance up, confused. For a moment, the air feels heavier, thicker. People look around, puzzled, before shrugging it off. Somewhere deep below, the plates of the earth shift just enough to send a ripple through the stone. You don't notice it, not yet, but the pigeons do. They rise all at once from the rooftops, a gray wave scattering into the sky. The ground hums before it moves. A deep vibration you feel in your ribs more than your feet. At first you think it's a cart rumbling past, but there's no cart, no horses, only a strange stillness in the air. Then the street shivers. tiles clattering against the roofs like teeth chattering in cold. Someone laughs nervously, muttering about an odd little shake, but the sound of their voice breaks apart as the tremor grows. Windows rattle. The guitar player's tune stumbles and stops. And then, one pane of glass bursts outward, scattering shards like startled birds into the street. The sound is sharper than you expect, like ice breaking under weight. You hear more of it now, one shatter, then another, as if the city has decided to trade its music for the brittle symphony of glass exploding. A bottle rolls out of a doorway, clinking its way across the cobblestones before vanishing into a crack. People back away from walls, looking up at the swaying balconies above them. The air is full of dust and little flakes of plaster, drifting down like snow that cuts when it lands on your skin. Somewhere nearby, a woman cries out as a chunk of masonry crashes onto the street, breaking apart in a cloud of pale grit. You cough, the taste of limestone sticking to the back of your throat. The market stalls sway dangerously, ropes straining against their poles. Apples tumble to the ground, rolling away like marbles escaping a child's grip. The merchant tries to gather them, but another jolt knocks him to his knees. He looks up at you, eyes wide, and says nothing. You both know there's nowhere to run. A priest stumbles out of the church, clutching a silver crucifix as if it might hold the stones in place. His robes are dusted white now, his hair littered with specks of plaster. He shouts something about the wrath of God, but his voice is drowned out by the groaning of wood and the moan of shifting walls. The pews inside have tipped over, spilling candles across the marble floor. The flames wink out one by one under the trembling, but the smell of smoke lingers like an unanswered question. The fountain in the plaza sloshes violently, water spilling over the carved edges and pooling at your feet. The children who were laughing minutes ago are silent now, pressed against their mother's skirts. One boy stares at the cobblestones, watching as fine cracks spread between them like thin, black lightning. His hand tightens around his mother's, but she's watching the sky, as though the danger might fall from above instead of rise from beneath. Somewhere a dog howls, the sound eerily steady against the chaos. You grab the edge of a market stall to steady yourself, but the wood creaks and threatens to topple. The merchant beside you shouts to hold on, but even his voice shakes, uneven as the ground beneath it. A basket of fish tips over, their silver bodies flopping helplessly in the dust. A gull swoops low, trying to claim one, but is startled away by another sharp burst of glass. The sound seems endless now, coming from every direction at once, like the city is shedding its skin in splinters. Above you, laundry that was fluttering gently only moments ago now whips violently, some pieces tearing loose entirely. A red scarf spins through the air before snagging on a lamppost. The lamppost itself trembles, the iron groaning. Across the street, the baker stands frozen in his doorway, a loaf of bread still in his hands, watching as the sign above him swings in wide, dangerous arcs. It's not until the next jolt sends a chimney tumbling that he finally drops the bread and runs. The vibrations pause for a breath, just long enough for you to wonder if it's over. People murmur to each other, voices low, eyes searching for any sign of normalcy. But before the thought can settle, the second wave hits, harder, longer. This time the sound isn't just glass or wood, it's the deep, stomach-turning groan of stone itself, deciding it no longer wants to stand. And in that moment, you know, this isn't a tremor. This is the earth tearing Lisbon apart. For a moment, no one moves. Not even you. It's as if the entire city has been caught mid-breath, suspended between instinct and confusion. The street is full of people standing rigid, eyes darting from the swaying rooftops to the trembling ground, trying to decide which will kill them first. A woman near you clutches her rosary so tightly her knuckles turn white, lips moving in silent prayer. Beside her, a man holds a half-eaten fig, staring at it as though the fruit might explain what's happening. Someone shouts for everyone to run, but the word dies halfway through the air, swallowed by another low rumble. It's not the sharp crack of stone or the shrill cry of glass this time. It's the sound of the earth's own voice, deep and ancient, vibrating through your bones. A few people stumble backward, but most just stand there, waiting for instructions no one is able to give. The choice between staying or running feels impossible, like trying to outrun the wind while standing in quicksand. In front of the church, the priest lifts his arms high, calling for repentance, his voice booming against the walls that now lean unnaturally toward the street. Some kneel right where they are, bowing their heads to the cobblestones as dust swirls around them. Others look upward, scanning the sky as if the danger might be falling from heaven. The bells above swing in wide arcs, their clangs uneven and frantic, echoing down the alleyways like a desperate warning. A merchant drops to his knees, but not in prayer. He's scooping coins from the ground, clutching them to his chest as if gold will anchor him. Across the plaza, two men argue about which way is safer, the open square or the narrow streets. Neither moves. The argument grows sharper, faster, until it's cut short by a sharp crack overhead. A balcony railing gives way, spilling a cascade of clay pots onto the stones below. The crash jolts everyone, but still no one runs. Children cling to their parents, eyes wide and unblinking. One little girl hides her face in her father's coat, refusing to look up. Another stands alone, forgotten in the chaos, her small hands pressed against her ears. You want to reach her, but your feet feel locked to the ground, as if the earth itself is holding you there to watch. Every second stretches longer, as though time has decided to slow down, just to let you hear every creak, every groan of the dying buildings. Somewhere to your right, an old man begins singing, a wavering hymn in Latin, his voice cracked but steady. It cuts through the noise like a thread of calm in a storm. People nearest to him join in, their words shaky but growing stronger. It's not bravery, it's resignation, a choice to face whatever comes with a song instead of a scream. The melody rises above the grinding stone, but the sound of the city breaking is louder, always louder. You realize the indecision is as dangerous as the quake itself. Every second spent standing still means the walls have another chance to fall on you. And yet, you don't move. You can't. Your body feels caught between the survival instinct that tells you to run and the deep, heavy pull of disbelief that insists none of this is real. Maybe if you just stand here, it will stop. Maybe the earth will sigh and settle, and you can buy figs again tomorrow. The ground lurches violently again, sending you stumbling into the nearest wall. Your hand presses against the cold stone, feeling it shudder beneath your palm. It's alive, breathing, shifting, angry. Somewhere behind you, someone finally screams. Not a word, not a prayer, just a raw sound of panic. And just like that, the stillness shatters. The crowd moves. Some run toward the open, some toward the church, some simply spin in circles as though trying to choose a direction in a world that has none left. You hear it before you see it. A sharp metallic snap, like a bone breaking inside the earth itself. The crowd's movement falters again as all eyes turn toward the great cathedral. Its bell tower sways unnaturally, the massive bronze bells inside crashing against their housings with each lurch. Then, with a groan that seems to pull the air from your lungs, the first stone at the tower's base shifts. The sound is deep, grinding, like the earth chewing through its own teeth. You know instantly it's going to fall. The front facade, so grand just minutes ago, begins to ripple in slow motion, the ornate carvings of saints and angels shedding chips of marble like falling snow. A gargoyle loses its perch and tumbles, shattering on the cobblestones in a spray of dust and stone teeth. People gasp, some frozen in awe, others dropping to their knees. You catch yourself holding your breath, unable to look away as centuries of craftsmanship tilt toward destruction in a matter of heartbeats. A section of the roof gives way first, collapsing inward with a roar that swallows the crowd's cries. Terracotta tiles smash against the pavement, splintering into sharp red shards that skitter across the plaza. The stained glass windows tremble in their frames, the colors flickering in the shifting light. One panel depicting the Virgin Mary bows outward before bursting apart, raining down a storm of blue, gold, and crimson glass. The shards catch the light for a brief, almost beautiful moment before vanishing into the dust. Inside, the church's heavy wooden beams groan under the strain. You can hear them splintering one by one, each crack echoing like a gunshot. Smoke from the fallen candles coils upward, mixing with the dust to paint the air in a hazy, choking gray. Through it, you glimpse the altar still standing. Just for now, its gold leaf dulled by grit, its candles sputtering in the tremors. A priest stands there, still clutching his crucifix, as though sheer will might hold the building together. Then the tower goes. It doesn't topple all at once, but in segments, like a giant being felled by slow, deliberate blows. The top section, where the bells hang, detaches first, crashing through the nave in a cascade of stone and bronze. The sound of the bells striking the floor is almost unbearable. A deep, mournful toll that vibrates through the ground and into your chest. People cover their ears, but the noise seems to seep through skin and bone. The main arch gives way next, the carved stone snapping apart like dry bread. Each chunk that falls sends up a wave of dust so thick you can barely see the people standing a few feet away. They stumble blindly, coughing, eyes streaming. You feel grit crunch between your teeth, coating your tongue. Somewhere in the chaos, a woman calls out a name, her voice cracking on the last syllable. There's no answer, only the endless roar of the building's final collapse. When the last wall falls, the plaza goes silent except for the settling of debris. It's a different kind of silence, heavy, oppressive, the kind that fills your ears until you can hear your own heartbeat. The air is thick, tasting of lime and ash. Where the cathedral once stood is now a jagged heap, still shifting under its own weight. The tallest thing in the plaza now is a statue of a saint that somehow remains upright, its face streaked with dust but untouched. You stand there, heart pounding, realizing you've just watched more than stone die. This cathedral was the city's anchor, the thing that made Lisbon feel whole. Now it's gone, and the ground still shivers beneath your feet. The crowd begins to move again, some toward the rubble, others away, but everyone's slower now, as if each step might wake the earth again. And deep down, you know the morning isn't over. This was only the first blow. The first building doesn't so much fall as melt, its front bowing outward like warm wax, stone blocks sliding one after the other in slow, sickening waves. You can see each layer of the wall give way, the plaster skin peeling back to reveal brick ribs beneath. A balcony tilts forward, dropping a potted plant that shatters in the dust. People gasp as though the plant, not the building, is the tragedy, but their eyes snap upward again as a whole corner of the facade gives way, crumbling into the street like sugar falling from a broken spoon. The sound is unlike anything you've heard before. Not the sharp crack of glass or the groan of wood, but the grinding roar of stone against stone, centuries of weight deciding to let go all at once. It's a sound that makes you feel small, as if the buildings are not dying but waking up after a long sleep, stretching into the space where people happen to be standing. Chunks of masonry roll into the street, the corners still sharp enough to cut through the leather soles of boots. A row of houses sways in sympathy, their fronts rippling as if they've decided to lean together for comfort. Wooden shutters slap open and shut, one catching the wind and sailing across the plaza like a startled bird. Dust blooms from each impact, clinging to hair and eyelashes until everyone wears the same pale mask. The man next to you spits into his hand, only to find it full of grit. He laughs once, short, sharp, then ducks as a roof beam crashes down behind him. Some buildings seem to resist at first, bending but not breaking, the walls bowing inward like a stubborn spine. You think they might hold, but then a window frame twists and the entire front slides down in one piece, collapsing into a heap of stone, plaster, and memories. In the falling dust, you glimpse a painting still hanging on what used to be a living room wall, two lovers frozen mid-dance, before it disappears under the rubble. It's here and gone in less than a breath. Every collapse seems to trigger another, the vibrations traveling through the ground like a whispered dare. Across the street, a tall building shivers once, twice, then folds in on itself as if bowing out of the performance. The roof tiles scatter in all directions, some skimming across the cobblestones, others spinning into the crowd. People shield their heads with their arms, eyes squinting against the raining debris. One man catches a tile in midair and sets it gently on the ground, as though keeping score in some absurd game. In the middle of the chaos, a chicken somehow escapes from a collapsing shop, flapping wildly over the heads of the crowd before disappearing down an alley. The sight makes someone laugh, a real laugh, absurd and human, but it's quickly swallowed by the next wave of destruction. A storefront sign detaches and drops to the street with a metallic clang. Its painted letters, Mercado do Aro, half buried in dust by the time it stops rocking. The air smells of lime dust and singed wood, a strange mix that clings to your tongue. You can feel the heat of the sun dimming as the sky fills with grit, turning midday into something like dusk. Somewhere a bell rings once, then stops abruptly, silenced by the fall of the wall that held it. You want to run, but the street ahead is blocked by fresh rubble, a jagged new hill in a city that was all flat an hour ago. Then comes the strangest part. Between the crashes, there's silence. Not a peaceful silence, but the heavy pause of something considering its next move. You find yourself holding your breath with everyone else, waiting to see which building will be next. And when the rumble begins again, you know it's not over, not even close. This is only the beginning of Lisbon's long, slow collapse. You hear the voices first, muffled cries from somewhere under the rubble. They're faint but urgent, the kind of sound that snaps people out of shock and into motion. A man drops to his knees beside a collapsed wall, clawing at the debris with his bare hands. Dust cakes his hair and face, streaked by sweat that runs in muddy rivulets. He doesn't look up when others shout warnings about aftershocks. His voice is low, steady, calling a name over and over, as if repetition alone could keep it alive. Nearby, a woman pulls at a timber beam wedged across a doorway, her palms raw and bleeding. Two strangers join her, heaving until the wood shifts with a groan, releasing a cascade of smaller stones that skitter across the street. They don't find the person they were hoping for, just a shattered chair and a cloud of stale incense. But no one stops. The search moves from one mound to the next, each pile of rubble a desperate maybe. You join a small group working at what was once a bakery. The scent of bread is still faint in the air, mingling with the sour tang of dust. Someone swears they heard a voice inside. You dig until your nails split, prying loose bricks that crumble at the edges. Every piece you remove reveals another layer, the hole never seeming to widen. Sweat stings your eyes and your breath comes in short bursts. But stopping feels unthinkable. It's work stripped of thought. You move because you have to. A boy no older than 10 kneels beside what's left of a staircase, his hands too small to lift more than a few shards at a time. An older man crouches next to him, showing him how to wedge a splinter of wood under a larger stone for leverage. The boy nods once, fiercely, and keeps going. It's strange how the act of digging becomes a language, uniting people who've never spoken before. No one asks names here, only, "Can you lift this?" Or, "Do you hear that?" At one site, a muffled cough sends the group into overdrive. Hands fly faster, stones clattering into the growing pile behind them. Someone shouts for silence, and for a heartbeat, the street is still. You hear it too, breathing, faint but steady. The group surges forward, prying away a final slab to reveal a woman curled in a hollow space, her face streaked with dust, eyes wide in disbelief. She blinks at the sudden light. No one cheers. They just lift her gently, passing her from arm to arm until she's clear. Then they move to the next voice. Not every call for help ends with a rescue. More than once, the digging stops when the silence becomes too long, too complete. Those moments are quiet in a different way. No wailing, no collapse, just the heavy pause before someone covers the space with a tarp or folds their coat over the stones. People linger for a second, touching the rubble like it's a grave before moving on. The living need them elsewhere. A man in a torn waistcoat pulls free a wooden cradle, the blanket inside coated in gray dust. He holds it for a moment, staring at the small imprint still visible in the cloth. Without a word, he sets it gently on a nearby step and walks away. The cradle rocks once, twice, then stills. It's not the loud tragedies that weigh the most. It's these small, silent ones that seem to hang in the air long after you move on. By now, your hands are shaking, your fingers raw. You can feel grit lodged under your nails and in the creases of your skin. Around you, the street is a mosaic of broken walls and bent bodies, each one working in their own frantic rhythm. No one talks about whether it's safe. No one mentions the buildings still standing, waiting their turn to fall. The only thing that matters is the next voice you might hear. And so you keep digging. It begins as a haze, a faint shimmer in the air, like heat rising off a summer road. But within minutes, the dust thickens, swallowing colors and blurring edges until the city looks like it's been sketched in charcoal. The sun, once sharp and warm overhead, fades into a pale, uncertain disk. You can't tell if it's still morning or if the day has already surrendered to dusk. The dust carries a taste, dry, chalky, with a bitterness that clings to the back of your throat and makes every breath feel like you're swallowing stone. The cloud doesn't just block the light, it swallows sound too. The crashes of falling buildings seem muffled now, as though you're hearing them through heavy cloth. Voices turn into vague murmurs, shapes moving inside a fog you can't fully penetrate. You blink rapidly, trying to clear your eyes, but it only makes the grit grind against your lashes. Tears streak your cheeks, leaving clean lines down the gray coating your skin. Somewhere close, someone coughs, a harsh, ragged sound, and it sets off a chain reaction all around you. You pull a scrap of cloth from your pocket and tie it over your mouth, the fabric already warm from your hands. The air smells of lime, ash, and something sharper, burning wood from fires sparked in the chaos. Each breath feels heavier, like the dust has weight pressing against your lungs. You wonder how far it will spread, whether it will drift across the river or settle on the hills beyond the city. The thought makes you glance upward, but there's no sky left to see, only gray. Shapes emerge and vanish in the murk, figures wrapped in scarves or holding their coats over their faces, heads bowed against the invisible storm. A man passes you carrying a bundle in his arms, and for a moment you think it's a child. Then you realize it's a statue, small enough to cradle, its marble face streaked with soot. He doesn't look at you, just keeps walking until the dust swallows him whole. The scene feels unreal, like walking through a dream where everyone moves in slow, deliberate steps. The light changes again, dimming further until lanterns are lit in the streets. Their flames burn small and weak, flickering in the swirling air. The glow barely reaches the ground before it's devoured by the dust, casting the city in a strange twilight. Somewhere, a woman strikes flint for a lamp, her hands shaking. The first spark dies instantly, smothered before it can catch. She tries again and again until a weak flame finally clings to the wick. She holds it close to her chest as if afraid it might escape. Every surface feels coated now, your hair heavy with grit, your eyelashes clumping together, your hands rougher than you remember. You brush off your coat, but the motion releases more dust into the air, making you cough harder. Around you, people have given up trying to keep clean. They wipe their faces once, then simply push forward through the gray, focusing only on the ground in front of their feet. Somewhere in the fog, a child calls for their mother, the voice high and thin, barely cutting through the thick air. The dust dulls more than sight. It erases detail. Streets you've walked 100 times feel alien now, their edges blurred and unfamiliar. You can't tell where the plaza ends and the alley begins. Even the rubble seems muted, its jagged lines softened by the layer settling over it. You think you see the outline of the cathedral's ruins ahead, but when you approach, it's just another pile of collapsed homes. The landmarks are gone, replaced by this endless, shifting cloud that makes every direction feel the same. At last, the wind shifts, carrying some of the dust down toward the river. The light above brightens slightly, though it's still far from the clarity of morning. You can see a little farther now, enough to make out the shapes of people moving with renewed speed, as though the thinning air has lifted the weight from their shoulders. But you know the dust will return. It's hiding in every crack, waiting for the next tremor to shake it loose. And when it does, the day will fall into night again. It takes you a moment to notice what's missing. The streets are chaos, the air thick with dust, but there's another absence, subtle at first, that presses in around you. You tilt your head upward, scanning the rooftops. Not a single flutter of gray or white wings. The pigeons are gone. Lisbon is usually a city stitched together by their constant movement. Darting between bell towers, strutting across plazas, exploding into the air at the drop of a crust of bread. Now the sky is empty, as though the quake shook them straight out of existence. You remember seeing them just before the first tremor, clustered along the roof lines, cooing softly in the morning sun. Then, seconds before the earth heaved, they rose all at once, a panicked cloud of wings slicing through the air. You didn't think much of it. Birds spook easily. But now it feels like they knew. Animals do that sometimes, don't they? Sense what's coming before it comes. Historians are still debating whether the pigeons in Lisbon truly vanished for days after the quake, or if it was just the smoke and dust hiding them from view. Either way, you can't shake the feeling of being left behind. In their absence, the city sounds different. The familiar background hum, the flapping wings, the sudden whoosh of a startled flock is gone, replaced by the jagged noises of collapsing walls and human voices. You pass under an archway that would normally echo with the coos of nesting pairs, but now it's silent except for the drip of water from a cracked pipe. The emptiness above feels heavier than the dust. Without the birds, the city's vertical life is gone, leaving only the ground-bound struggle. You spot a boy standing in the plaza, staring at the sky with his hands cupped, as if holding invisible grain. He shakes them once, twice, like he's trying to lure the birds back with nothing more than habit. His mother tugs at his sleeve, pulling him towards safety, but he glances over his shoulder again, eyes still searching the empty air. You know that look. It's the look of someone realizing a piece of the world has slipped quietly away. Further along, a rooftop chicken coop sits open, its inhabitants gone. The door swings loosely on its hinge, creaking in the wind. Feathers cling to the wire mesh, quivering with each tremor. You wonder if the pigeons found safety somewhere, or if the quake scattered them to the winds, never to return. Maybe they've gone inland, to hills that aren't trembling. Maybe they're circling far above the cloud, waiting for the ground to stop moving. Or maybe they're gone for good, taking some unspoken assurance of normalcy with them. It's strange how quickly you miss them. You didn't think about the pigeons much before. If anything, they were a nuisance, swooping too close or leaving their droppings on statues. But now their absence feels like another wound, a reminder that even the smallest rhythms of the city have been broken. You imagine them as watchful sentinels, and now that they're gone, you feel less seen, less guarded. Every so often, you think you hear wings cutting the air. You turn quickly, scanning the sky, but it's always something else. The snap of a sheet in the wind, the fall of a loose roof tile, the groan of shifting timber. The silence above becomes its own kind of noise, a constant awareness pressing in from overhead. You start to understand why the boy in the plaza couldn't stop looking up. By late afternoon, the sky is still empty. You tell yourself they'll return when the dust clears, when the fires are out, when the earth decides to be still again. But some small, uneasy part of you wonders if the pigeons know something you don't, that this is only the beginning, and Lisbon's skies will never look the same. The first shouts about fire come from somewhere near the docks, but it's hard to tell exactly where. The sound is warped by the still hanging dust. You see a flicker at the edge of your vision, a brief orange bloom that vanishes in the gray. Then another. Soon the shouts multiply, echoing through the streets. Agua! Bring water! Men, women, even children rush to form a bucket line, their figures ghostly in the haze. You join in without thinking, your hands slipping around the rough wood of a pail that's heavier than it looks. The water is drawn from the nearest fountain, but the tremors have cracked its stone basin. Each bucket fills slower than the panic will allow. The line stretches awkwardly down the street, zigzagging around piles of rubble. When you pass your first bucket, you feel its heat. It's not fresh fire yet, but the stones around it are already warm, like coals buried under sand. Somewhere ahead, someone yells that the flames are spreading too quickly. No one answers because everyone knows it's true. By the time the bucket reaches the front, the fire has already leapt to another building. Flames lick at the eaves, curling along the timbers like they've been waiting for this chance. A man throws the water onto the blaze, and the hiss is swallowed instantly, the flames barely pausing before racing upward again. Another bucket comes and another, but the fire doesn't care. It climbs higher, pulling itself along the beams, spitting embers into the air like seeds. The wind shifts suddenly, carrying the heat straight down the bucket line. You feel it on your face, dry, sharp, as if the fire has exhaled. The person next to you pulls their scarf higher over their mouth, eyes watering. Farther up, a boy loses his grip, and the bucket spills across the stones. No one stops to scold him. There's no time for blame when the buildings themselves are feeding the flames. Some try to break apart shutters and doors, tossing the wood into the street to keep it from burning and spreading the fire. But even the stripped frames seem to smolder in the heat. The cobblestones underfoot grow slick with water and ash, making each step a risk. You hear the crash of a roof beam giving way, followed by a wave of sparks that ride the wind like fireflies. People duck instinctively, but the embers land on hair, cloth, and skin before being slapped away. At one point, the line stalls when a collapsed wall blocks the path. Buckets are passed over the debris hand to hand, the people on top coughing in the thick smoke. Your arms ache from the constant lifting and passing, but stopping feels worse than the pain. You think about how many hands have touched this same bucket in the last hour, and how every single one is as desperate as yours. The firelight grows brighter as the gray around you turns to orange. Shadows leap and twist on the walls, exaggerated by the flickering flames. The line has become almost mechanical. Lift, pass, but the fire is faster than the rhythm. You realize with a sinking feeling that this isn't a fight you can win with water alone. And then, in a moment that chills you despite the heat, the flames reach the place where the line began, the fountain itself. The carved stone basin glows faintly in the firelight, the water inside reflecting the orange sky above. You pass the next bucket forward anyway because there's nothing else to do. The fire has found its own path now, and it's not one you can block. At first, it's just a steady breeze, the kind Lisbon often gets off the Tagus, enough to flutter laundry and ruffle a hat brim. But within minutes, the air sharpens into a restless wind, tugging at coats and pushing grit into your eyes. The flames respond instantly, flaring brighter, stretching higher, as if the wind has whispered some secret encouragement. You feel the change in temperature on your skin. The warmth becomes heat. The heat becomes something close to unbearable. The fire no longer creeps, it sprints. The wind races through the narrow streets like it knows the route, finding every alley that will funnel its force into the heart of the flames. Loose tiles clatter across rooftops, some skidding over the edge to smash below. Sparks fly upward in long, twisting streams, swirling in the wind before scattering like a cruel kind of confetti. The bucket line you joined earlier is still working, but now the water barely reaches the fire before the wind blows the spray sideways into the crowd. You watch in disbelief as burning thatch from a collapsing roof takes flight, sailing across the plaza and landing on a building that was, moments ago, untouched. The wood catches instantly, the fire licking along its edges like it's been waiting all day. People shout warnings, but the wind swallows the words, turning them into shapeless noise. Somewhere, a man throws his coat over a small blaze, stamping it out, only for the wind to send another ember straight into the coat's smoldering hem. Every turn of the street becomes a gamble. Some corners offer a brief shelter from the gusts, but others feel like you've stepped into a furnace. You see a woman's scarf ripped clean from her neck, carried into the fire like an offering. Smoke drives sideways into your face, so thick and sudden that you cough until your chest aches. The wind seems to delight in finding new ways to make you stumble. The smell changes too. It's no longer just wood and dust. It's fabric, paint, and something chemical you can't quite name. The wind carries it straight into your lungs, leaving a bitter metallic aftertaste. Your eyes water constantly now, but blinking only seems to grind more grit into them. All around, faces are streaked with mud made from dust and tears. People look older, worn down not just by fear, but by the weight of air that feels hostile. At one point, a group tries to use the wind against the fire, forming a line to beat flames away from a building's entrance before it spreads inside. But a single, stronger gust pushes the fire sideways, wrapping it around the group in an instant. They scatter, coughing and shielding their faces, the building behind them already lost. You realize the wind isn't just an accomplice. It's in charge now. Somewhere above the rooftops, the sound changes. The crackle of burning wood deepens into a roar, a low, constant thunder fed by the air itself. You've heard waves like that on stormy nights by the coast, but this is no ocean. This is the sound of a city being devoured in broad daylight. The wind gusts again, bending the flames low enough that they sweep across the cobblestones, searching for something else to claim. By now, the fire moves faster than you can track. You stop trying to chase it and start looking for where it hasn't reached yet. But the wind moves quicker than thought, and you can't shake the feeling that no matter where you stand, it will find you. Somewhere high above the smoke, you imagine gulls and pigeons riding the wind far away from here. You wish you could follow them? The heat drives you back before you can even think. It's not a retreat so much as a reflex, the way your body moves away from an open flame on instinct. All around, others are making the same choice, turning away from the bucket lines and the collapsing streets, funneling instead toward the one thing in Lisbon that can't burn, the Tagus River. You follow the flow of the crowd, your steps quickening as the air behind you crackles like paper held too close to a candle. The streets to the waterfront are clogged with rubble, forcing people into narrow lanes where the wind shoves smoke straight into your lungs. Someone shouts for everyone to stay calm, but the words dissolve under the chorus of coughing and the slap of hurried footsteps. You pass a shop with its windows blown out, shelves toppled and goods scattered. A child's wooden toy lies in the street, one wheel charred black. You step over it without thinking, your focus fixed on the promise of open air ahead. The smell of the river reaches you before the sight of it, a cool, briny tang that cuts through the smoke. For a moment it feels like relief, but as you round the final bend, you see the edge of the water already crowded with hundreds of people, their faces turned toward the dark line of the opposite shore. Some are wading knee-deep, holding their skirts or trousers high. Others have clambered into small fishing boats, pushing off before they're even properly balanced. The urgency is contagious. You start moving faster. Near the docks, the air changes again, the wind pulling the smoke out toward the river like a vast chimney. It clears your vision enough to see the ships rocking in the current, their masts swaying like tall, uneasy trees. Sailors shout over the chaos, some throwing down ropes to pull survivors aboard. The decks are already packed, figures pressed shoulder to shoulder, eyes wide. You spot one man cradling a caged canary against his chest, muttering something you can't hear. On the sloping shore, people kneel to splash water on their faces, gasping as if they've broken through the surface after a long dive. A woman dunks a bundle of cloth in the river and wraps it around her child's head, the wet fabric clinging to the little one's cheeks. Nearby, a group of men tries to push a rowboat into the current, but it's heavy with supplies, barrels, sacks, bundles tied with rope. They argue about what to take until another gust from the city sends sparks skittering toward the dock, and they shove off without looking back. You edge closer to the water, the boards underfoot slick with algae and river spray. The crowd presses in from behind, everyone jockeying for space without daring to start a fight. The river smells sharper here, the salt mingling with the tang of tar from the ships. You can feel the pull of the tide through the dock planks, a steady rhythm beneath the chaos. Someone behind you mutters about the tide being unusually low, but the comment is lost under another shout for room. For a brief moment, you think about staying, about finding an open space on the bank and letting the river's cool air shield you from the fire. But the sight of another roof collapsing in the distance sends a wave of sparks rolling toward the shore, the embers dancing in the wind like a swarm of angry bees. You step onto the nearest boat without asking, gripping the edge as it rocks beneath you. The river may not burn, but it offers no promise of safety, only a different kind of uncertainty. As the boat pulls away from the dock, you glance back at the city. Through the shifting smoke, you can see the fire crawling toward the waterfront, the flames reflected in the dark water like a second city burning upside down. It's a view you'll never forget. Lisbon devoured from the inside out, its people scattering into the only element that will have them. From the safety of the boat, or at least the illusion of it, you watch the city burn. The fire moves with too much purpose, too much speed. It seems to jump across empty streets, racing ahead of where the wind alone should carry it. You hear someone behind you mutter that this isn't just the quake's doing, that some people are helping the flames along. The idea is absurd at first, but then you see it, a shadowed figure slipping through an alley, tossing something into the base of a wall before darting away. A heartbeat later, the wall flares with sudden light. Historians are still debating whether these acts of arson actually happened, or if they were born from the panic and paranoia of the moment. In the years since, some accounts claim looters set fires to cover their tracks, while others suggest political enemies saw an opportunity to cripple the city's power. But standing here, with the smoke thick enough to sting your eyes and the fire moving faster than nature should allow, You can't help but wonder if it's true. On the far side of the plaza, you spot two men struggling over a wooden crate. One finally shoves the other away, smashing the crate open and pulling out bottles of oil. He hurls them against a building's front, the liquid flashing into flame as it meets an ember carried by the wind. The heat leaps toward the next building instantly, as if guided. The man doesn't stay to watch. He disappears into the maze of streets. From the boat, voices rise in argument. Some insist these are just accidents. Chimneys collapsing onto rooftops, oil lamps knocked over by the tremors. Others swear they've seen too many suspicious bursts of fire to believe in coincidence. You find yourself caught between the two sides, scanning the city for any hint of deliberate motion among the chaos. Every time you think you see something, the smoke swallows it whole. The water rocks beneath you as another boat pushes off from the dock, its passengers speaking in hushed tones. One woman, her face streaked with soot, tells the man beside her that she saw soldiers blocking certain streets, funneling people toward the fire instead of away from it. He shakes his head, muttering about rumors and fear, but her voice carries conviction, the kind born from a moment you wish you hadn't witnessed. Theories will multiply for decades, but right now the only truth is the heat on your skin and the sight of entire neighborhoods turning into glowing skeletons. Whether sparked by quake, wind, or human hands, the fire doesn't care. It eats everything with the same hunger. Roofs cave, walls bow outward, the air shimmers with waves of heat. The flames move in strange patterns, curling back to devour what they've missed, leaving nothing unmarked. Somewhere inland, another explosion rattles the air, a sound deeper than collapsing stone. A thick column of darker smoke rises behind the lighter fire haze, proof that something heavy and flammable has gone up at once. A man near you says it's a warehouse. Maybe wine, maybe oil. Either way, the fire's feast has just doubled. The river reflects it all in cruel detail, rippling gold and black under the shifting sky. You grip the side of the boat tighter, not because you think it will tip, but because the city you knew this morning is unrecognizable. Whether human hands help destroy it or not, the result is the same. Lisbon is burning from the inside out, and no one will ever agree on exactly how it started, or why. All you know is that tonight, the city will be smaller than it was this morning, and the truth will be smaller still. The first thing you notice isn't the wave, it's the absence of the river. One moment the Tagus is lapping gently at the docks, the next it's sliding backward, pulling itself away from the shore like a long breath being drawn in. The water rushes out with startling speed, leaving behind a wide stretch of glistening seabed that no one has seen in living memory. For a moment, there's silence, a collective pause as people register what they're looking at. Then, like the snap of a rope, the crowd surges forward. They spill down the wet sand and mud, their footsteps splashing through shallow pools where fish flop helplessly. The air smells sharp, salt, riverweed, and something metallic from the exposed shipwrecked timbers jutting up like broken ribs. Men wade out toward barrels and crates, prying them open with sticks and crowbars. Someone hauls up a length of chain as thick as his arm, grinning through a mask of soot. Women scoop fish into their skirts, laughing as if the disaster has suddenly turned generous. Everywhere you look, there's movement. People pulling at nets tangled in the mud. Children darting after crabs that scramble sideways toward deeper pools. A boy swings a rope around a half-submerged wine cask, yelling for help to drag it ashore. His friends rush over, their bare feet sliding in the slick muck, the cask tips leaking a sweet, fermented smell into the air. They don't care what's inside. They just know it's theirs now. Farther out, a group has gathered around the skeletal remains of an old galleon, its hull cracked open by time. The timbers groan as they climb over them, picking at rusted tools and broken ceramics. One man lifts a small mud-caked statue and wipes it clean on his sleeve, revealing the serene face of a saint. He tucks it under his arm like a loaf of bread, already turning back toward shore. The mood is strange, half desperate, half celebratory. People who were running from fire an hour ago are now wading waist-deep into the riverbed, calling to each other about what they found. It feels like a marketplace that appeared from nowhere, a flash of abundance in the middle of ruin. But beneath the laughter, there's an undercurrent of unease. You can see it in the way some keep glancing back at the horizon, scanning for something they can't quite name. You step onto the exposed sand, the surface soft and cold under your boots. Small rivulets trickle past, racing back toward the center of the river as if they've realized they don't belong here. A woman near you drops a handful of coins into her basket, the metal still slick with mud. She doesn't look up when you pass. Her eyes are fixed on the next glint of silver, half buried in the silt. Somewhere in the distance, a gull cries, a sharp, lonely sound that echoes off the empty river walls. It's the first bird you've heard all day, and it makes the hairs on your neck rise. The gull circles once, then wheels back toward the open water, as if it wants no part in what's happening here. You wonder if the pigeons that vanished earlier had the same instinct. You find yourself glancing upriver now, toward the mouth of the Tagus where the water has vanished. The exposed seabed stretches on, glistening under the dim light, but something about its stillness feels wrong. The river isn't supposed to leave, and if it does, it isn't supposed to stay gone. But for now, no one seems to care. They're too busy claiming whatever the earth has coughed up, blind to the fact that sometimes a gift is just bait. It starts as a vibration, so faint you almost mistake it for another aftershock. Your boots tremble slightly against the wet sand, but the ground beneath you is solid, too solid for a quake. Then comes the sound, low and strange, somewhere between a drum roll and a growl. It's so distant at first that you can't tell where it's coming from. People keep digging through the mud, laughing, calling out their finds, the noise lost in the thud of boots and the clatter of salvaged goods. But the sound grows. You notice it because it doesn't fade the way wind or voices do. It builds, layer on layer, until it's something you feel as much as hear. A man standing beside a beach barrel straightens, tilting his head like he's listening to music in the next room. His smile falters. Someone else hears it and stops mid-step, their hand frozen around a string of fish. The laughter peters out in patches, replaced by the uneasy shuffle of boots in wet sand. The roar keeps coming, louder now, steady as breathing. You look toward the mouth of the Tagus. The line where the river should be is a shimmering blur, the air above it vibrating in the light. At first you think it's a trick of the dust, some leftover distortion from the fires still burning behind you. But then you see movement, fast, deliberate movement, pulling along the horizon like a black curtain being drawn across the water. The sound deepens, a bass note so low it makes your ribs hum. People start to murmur. Someone near you asks, "What is that?" And no one answers. A fisherman drops the rope he's holding and cups his hands around his eyes, squinting into the distance. Whatever he sees makes him turn without a word and run toward shore, his feet pounding hard enough to send ripples through the puddles at your feet. A strange wind follows the sound, rushing toward you from the open water. It's cooler than the heat of the burning city, but it carries a strange scent. Salt, yes, but also something sharp and metallic, like the smell of an approaching storm. The gulls that were circling earlier are gone again, vanished into the sky without a sound. You think of the pigeons, the silence above the rooftops, and a cold weight settles in your stomach. The horizon shifts again, the dark line rising higher now, too high to be a ship or a bank of clouds. It's the river, but not the way you've ever seen it. The water is climbing, curling forward at the top like a hand reaching down. You can't see its end on either side. It stretches across the mouth of the Tagus, a moving wall. The roar is no longer distant. It's here, pressing against your eardrums, swallowing every other sound. Someone screams, "Tsunami!" and the word rips through the crowd like a lit fuse. Buckets, nets, crates, everything drops where it is as people turn toward the shore. The wet seabed that moments ago felt like a lucky discovery becomes a trap. You feel the sand clinging to your boots, holding you for half a heartbeat too long before you wrench yourself free. Around you, the laughter is gone. Now it's only the ragged gasps of people realizing the river's coming back, and then it's angry. You're halfway across the seabed when the shadow falls over you. It's not the smoke from the burning city this time. It's taller, darker, and moving far too quickly. You glance over your shoulder and your breath stops. The wave is no longer just a distant line. It's a wall now, towering above the rooftops along the waterfront, its crest curling forward in a froth of white that flashes against the gray sky. For a second, the world holds its breath with you, then the wave breaks, The sound is like the tearing of the earth itself, louder than the quake, louder than the fire, a single endless roar that fills every space inside you. The air slams against your back as the water surges forward faster than you thought water could move. You try to run, but the seabed that felt soft before is now sucking at your boots, pulling you down with every step. All around you, people are shouting names, prayers, curses, but it's hard to tell if you can actually hear them over the water. The first rush hits the stragglers, still bent over their finds, sweeping them off their feet like leaves in a gutter. Buckets, crates, fish, everything spins together in a violent swirl. You see a man disappear beneath the surface, then reappear several feet closer to you, his arms flailing. Another wave, smaller but faster, rolls ahead of the main wall, smacking into your legs with a force that nearly sends you over. The water is shockingly cold, the kind that bites bone deep. By the time you reach the original shoreline, the wave is already there. It slams into the docks, shattering planks and sending splinters spinning into the air. Boats tethered to the posts are torn loose as though the ropes were made of string, their hulls crashing into each other in a spray of white foam. The crowd surges up the slope toward higher ground, slipping on the wet stone steps. Some don't make it. They're caught in the churn and pulled back down. The smell of the river is everywhere now, salt and silt, mixed with the acrid smoke still drifting from the burning city. It's in your nose, your mouth, your lungs. You grab the railing along the stairs, but the water reaches it in seconds, washing over your hands and dragging at your grip. Beside you, a woman clutches a child to her chest, her teeth bared in effort as she pushes upward against the current. The force of the wave doesn't just knock things over, it tears them apart. You watch a small storage shed splinter into 1,000 pieces, each board carried upward like driftwood. A cart loaded with barrels tips over, the barrels bobbing for a moment before being sucked back toward the river's center. In the distance, another wave follows, not as tall, but just as relentless. It's as if the river has decided to take everything back, piece by piece. When you finally reach the top of the slope, your legs burning, you look back. The waterfront is gone, swallowed under a churning, frothing mass of water. The seabed that had tempted so many is invisible now, erased in seconds. The wave has pushed deep into the lower streets, carrying debris, boats, and people in a chaotic swirl. The noise is deafening, a blend of rushing water, splintering wood, and the distant crack of another building giving way. And then, in a strange and terrible moment, the water pauses, not because it has stopped, but because it has nowhere left to go. For a heartbeat, the current hangs in place, trembling. Then it begins to pull back, sucking everything with it, back toward the river's center. The docks, the market stalls, the treasures pulled from the seabed, gone. The Tagus has reclaimed them all, and it's not finished yet. You spot him just as the water begins its violent retreat. A merchant you recognize from the market earlier, the one who had been shouting prices for figs like they were gold. Now he's in the river, arms wrapped around a massive barrel bobbing in the swirling current. The water spins him like a child's toy, pulling him toward the center of the Tagus with terrifying speed. His face is pale under the coating of grime, his eyes wide but focused, locked on the one thing keeping him above the surface. The barrel must have been from one of the supply carts you saw overturned by the wave. It's lashed tight with rope, sealed at both ends, buoyant enough to hold his weight. He grips it so hard his knuckles show white, even through the mud and river water. Every time a new piece of debris smashes into him, a plank, a fishing net, the shattered remains of a table, he ducks behind the barrel, letting it take the hit. You can tell he's not just hanging on, he's steering with his legs, kicking away from the worst of the wreckage. The current is merciless, sucking everything back toward the river's center, but the merchant somehow finds a line of drift, one of those strange, invisible lanes where the water's calmer. He uses it to angle toward a collapsed dock further downstream, though it's still half submerged. Twice he nearly loses the barrel, once when the rope snags on a floating beam, once when a spinning crate slams into him. But each time he yanks it free with a desperate grunt. From your vantage point on the higher steps, you can see other swimmers fighting the same current, most without anything to hold on to. Some vanish beneath the foam and don't come back. The merchant never looks at them, Whether out of focus or fear, you can't tell. His world is reduced to the barrel, the water, and the distance between him and solid ground. A wavelet lifts him just enough to catch the edge of the collapsed dock, and he slams into it with a hollow thud. The impact nearly knocks him loose, but his fingers hook into a splintered board. Inch by inch, he hauls himself and the barrel up onto the tilted surface. The water surges beneath him, but the dock holds, just enough for him to crawl higher, dragging the barrel along like a talisman. When he finally collapses, chest heaving, he lays one hand flat on the wood and laughs. A sharp, incredulous bark that carries all the way to where you're standing. It's the laugh of someone who knows the odds were wrong, but luck picked him anyway. He rolls onto his back, still hugging the barrel, and stares up at the sky. From here, the smoke from the city frames his outline, the drifting gray curling around him like a second tide. You wonder if he's thinking about what was in that barrel. Wine, oil, maybe salted fish, or if he's just grateful it was there at all. Later, people will say stories like his are proof that miracles happened that day, that survival sometimes came down to nothing more than being in the right place when the wrong thing happened. But watching him now, soaked to the bone, and clutching his lifeline like it's part of him, you know it's not just luck, it's instinct. It's the will to hold on to whatever floats, no matter how cold, how heavy, or how uncertain the shore might be. By nightfall, the fires still burn in pockets across the city, their glow flickering against the low ceiling of smoke. But here, in the open fields beyond the last standing houses, the air is clearer and the stars have come out, bright, sharp, almost intrusive after a day of choking haze. Families cluster together in small groups, wrapped in whatever blankets or coats they manage to grab before running. You hear the muffled rustle of fabric as parents pull children close, trying to wrap their bodies around them like shields against the cold. Some lie flat on the grass, staring up at constellations that look almost too calm for the night they've lived through. Orion hangs tilted above the horizon, the Pleiades barely visible near the moon. A man points them out to his daughter, his voice low and deliberate, as if naming the stars might keep her from remembering what she saw in the streets. She listens, but her eyes keep darting back toward the orange glow on the skyline. The ground here is uneven, still trembling faintly with each aftershock, but no one dares to move back toward the city. Every time the earth shivers, you feel people stiffen, holding their breath until it passes. Blankets are pulled tighter. Children are told to close your eyes, sleep now, though the tone makes it sound like a prayer more than a command. No one really sleeps, at least not deeply. The night air is cold enough to bite through layers. You watch a mother take off her own coat to lay it over her two sons, then sit back against a rock with only a scarf to keep the chill at bay. A man nearby strikes flint to start a small fire, but the flame flickers and dies in the wind. He tries again, cupping his hands around it until a tiny orange ember glows. People shuffle closer, grateful for even the illusion of warmth. Some groups share what food they have: bread, dried figs, pieces of cheese wrapped in cloth. A few pass wineskins from hand to hand, the liquid warming more in spirit than in body. Between bites, voices drop low, telling fragments of what they saw. A neighbor's house collapsing, the moment the wave hit the dock, the strange vanishing of the pigeons. Each story is met with slow nods, as if confirming the day's events weren't just a fever dream. Overhead, the stars seem almost cruel in their brightness. You find yourself staring at them too long until your neck aches. They don't flicker like the flames did. They don't care about the smoke, or the wind, or the water. They just watch. You wonder how many other nights in history they've looked down on scenes like this. Fields full of people who used to have roofs, now counting themselves lucky just to have the ground under them. A sudden breeze pushes through the field, carrying with it the faint scent of the sea and the sharper tang of burning wood. People pull blankets tighter, turning their faces away from the city. No one talks about going back tonight. The idea of walls feels dangerous now, like stepping into a trap you can't see. Out here, at least, you can look up at the stars and know nothing is hanging over your head but the cold, empty sky. At first, the night is filled only with murmurs, low conversations, the occasional cough, the restless shifting of bodies trying to get comfortable on bare ground. Then, from somewhere near the center of the field, a soft strum of strings breaks through the quiet. It's hesitant at first, like the player isn't sure if music belongs here tonight. But the sound floats out into the cool air, and heads start to turn toward it, drawn the way moths are drawn to a lantern. The musician is an older man, sitting cross-legged on a wool blanket, a Portuguese guitar balanced on his knee. His coat is patched at the elbows, and his fingers are quick despite the cold. He doesn't play anything loud or fast, just slow, looping melodies, the kind you might hear at a summer tavern in the quiet hours before dawn. The notes linger in the air, each one stretching into the next, making the night feel less jagged, less sharp-edged. Children are the first to draw closer, creeping toward the sound with the cautious hope of something familiar. A little girl with a braid down her back sits in front of him, legs tucked under her skirt, watching his hands move across the strings. Her brother, younger by a few years, leans his head against her shoulder and closes his eyes. The music doesn't erase the fear, but it pushes it back far enough for their breathing to slow. Others begin to hum along, softly at first. The tune isn't one you can dance to, but it's steady, and there's comfort in that. A woman nearby pulls a comb from her pocket and begins untangling her daughter's hair in time with the beat. A man with a torn sleeve taps the rhythm against his knee, staring into the dirt, but clearly listening. The field seems to breathe together for the first time since the shaking started. Between songs, the musician pauses to flex his fingers, then glances up with a small smile. "We'll keep playing until the sun comes," he says, his voice rough but warm. It's not a promise anyone asked for, but it feels like one they needed. He shifts into another melody, this one brighter with little flourishes that make the children sit up straighter. The music curls upward toward the stars, defiant in its softness. Someone produces a small drum, no one sees from where, and adds a gentle beat to the guitar's flow. The sound spreads outward like ripples in water. Even those lying far from the circle lift their heads, the music threading its way between blankets and huddled bodies. For a few moments, the field is something other than a place of exile. It's a gathering. The children stay closest, their knees pulled up to their chests, eyes following every note. A few dare to smile, the tightness in their faces easing. One boy claps quietly at the end of a song, and others follow, the sound polite and small but genuine. The musician nods as if accepting their thanks on behalf of the night itself. In the distance, the fires still glow, and somewhere a wall collapses with a muffled thud. But here, in this small patch of open ground, the music holds its ground against the dark. It's fragile, like everything else left in Lisbon tonight, but it's enough to remind you, and everyone else, that you're still alive to hear it. It doesn't take long for the quiet of the music to be pierced by whispers, low at first, but spreading like embers through dry grass. You catch fragments as you move between the blankets. Talk of the pigeons fleeing, the river vanishing before the wave, the sudden burst of wind that turned the fire into a storm. To some, these aren't just coincidences. They're warnings, omens, proof that what happened today wasn't random, but a sign from God, or perhaps from something older and less forgiving. A man near the edge of the field speaks in a voice just loud enough for his group to hear, but the words carry farther than he intends. He claims he saw the sky darken moments before the quake, not from dust, but from a shadow that moved against the sun. He says it was shaped like a hand, fingers spread, blotting out the light. A woman gasps, clutching at her rosary, and asks if that's why the cathedral fell first, to cleanse the city of sin. Others tell a different story, that the fire was lit on purpose by those trying to rid Lisbon of evil spirits released by the quake. Someone swears they saw a man in priest robes tossing oil onto a wall, muttering in Latin before vanishing into the smoke. Another insists it wasn't priests at all, but sailors, enacting some pagan rite to call down the wave. The details change with each retelling, but the tone stays the same. Half fear, half certainty. Children, wide-eyed, drink in every word. They ask about the pigeons again, why they left and whether they'll come back. An old woman, her voice trembling but fierce, tells them the birds were messengers, sent to warn those who could understand. "We didn't listen," she says, "and now the city has been judged." Her story drapes over the group like another blanket, one that offers no warmth. The rumors shift from supernatural to biblical. Someone quotes Revelation about the sea giving up its dead and the earth shaking before the final judgment. A man with soot still on his face nods and says the quake came on All Saints' Day for a reason. This was a test, he says, and most failed. The people around him murmur agreement, their eyes fixed on the glowing horizon as if waiting for the next sign to appear. You notice others pulling away from these conversations, choosing instead to sit closer to the musicians or to stare silently into the dark. Not everyone wants to weigh the night with prophecy, but the whispers still thread through the field, weaving themselves into the air no matter where you stand. Even without believing them, you feel them settling under your skin. Every so often, a gust of wind carries the smell of smoke from the city, and the murmurs grow sharper, more urgent. It's as though each new scent of burning stone is proof that the punishment isn't finished. You glance toward the skyline, half expecting to see some unexplainable shape rising from the ruins. There's nothing, only the flicker of firelight, but your mind can't quite shake the images the rumors have painted. By the time the music slows for the night, the field feels different, not quieter, just heavier, as if the stories have added weight to the air itself. Whether they're true or not doesn't seem to matter. In the dark, with the earth still trembling beneath you, truth feels like something you might never be able to separate from fear. As the night wears on, the whispers about omens fade into practical fears. People talk about where they'll sleep tomorrow, and the night after that, and how long the earth might keep shaking. It's then you hear a story that cuts through the speculation. Not rumor, not prophecy, but fact. A man wrapped in a heavy wool cloak, his face half hidden in shadow, says he once worked for the royal household. His voice is calm, almost formal, as he explains that after the quake, the king himself issued an order. No one in Lisbon was to sleep indoors until further notice. The reasoning was simple. Too many buildings still stood on cracked foundations, their walls leaning just enough to look safe, but ready to collapse at the next tremor. The king had seen it happen with his own eyes. Families retreating into their half-damaged homes, only to be buried in their sleep when the aftershocks returned. His decree, the man insists, was for survival, not ceremony. For weeks afterward, Lisbon's nights were like this one. Fields, gardens, and plazas turned into sleeping grounds, the city's life pushed out into the open air. Around the man, heads nod slowly. Some remember those weeks, or have heard their parents speak of them. Others seem unsettled, as if the idea of a royal command to abandon shelter makes the disaster feel even larger, even more official. It wasn't just nature that emptied the streets. It was law. The man adds that tents sprang up like small fortresses against the cold, made from ship sails, market tarps, anything that could be lashed together. Neighbors who had never spoken before shared fires and bread. Privacy vanished, replaced by the comfort and the tension of constant company. He describes how the king himself refused to sleep inside, setting an example by staying in a royal pavilion outside the palace grounds. It wasn't luxury, he says, but the act mattered. People believed that if the king could endure the damp nights and the creeping cold, so could they. Even the nobility followed suit, their ornate chambers left empty, while they huddled under makeshift roofs of canvas and rope. It was the only time, the man claims, that Lisbon's richest and poorest shared the same ceiling, the sky. Children in the circle leaned forward, fascinated. One asks how long the decree lasted. The man pauses, squinting at the stars as if counting them might summon the answer. Long enough, he says finally, that when people did go back inside, it felt strange to have walls again. He admits that some never returned to their homes at all, preferring the open air, convinced that any roof might still betray them. The field falls quiet after he finishes. You can feel the truth of his words in the stillness around you. It's not a story meant to scare, but it carries a weight heavier than the rumors of omens. This was the shape of survival, not grand, not heroic, but cautious and communal. A city forced to breathe under the same sky, night after night, until fear became habit. Somewhere in the dark, a child yawns, the sound small and unguarded. Parents pull blankets tighter, casting glances at the faint glow of the city beyond. You imagine the king's pavilion, the damp earth under his bed, and wonder if he stared at these same stars, hearing the same restless breathing all around him. The decree may have ended long ago, but here, in this open field, it feels as if it never did. By morning, the field where you slept feels like a pause button that's finally been released. People rise stiffly from blankets and makeshift bedding, their eyes still swollen from smoke and lack of sleep. The cold in your bones hasn't faded, but the pull toward the city is stronger than the fear of what waits there. In twos and threes, groups begin walking back toward the ruins, carrying whatever tools they can find: shovels, wooden beams, even bits of broken doors, to dig for whoever might still be alive. You follow, your steps slow but deliberate, the earth crunching beneath your boots. The streets are almost unrecognizable in the pale light. Landmarks you used to navigate by are gone, replaced by jagged heaps of stone and timber. Here and there, walls still stand alone, their upper windows staring out like watchful, empty eyes. A church bell lies on its side in the middle of a road, the bronze dented from its fall. People step around it without stopping. It's too heavy to move, and today the weight that matters is the rubble crushing anyone trapped beneath. The first group you join is already working in silence, their breaths misting in the cold morning air. A man with a rope burns his palms pulling away a beam. A woman kneels beside him, digging barehanded into the dust. Someone mutters they heard tapping from under this pile earlier, but no one has heard it since. No one says out loud what that might mean. Instead, they keep moving stones, each piece handed back along a chain until it disappears into the growing mound behind you. Further down the street, another cluster has formed around what used to be a bakery. The air smells faintly sweet, like burnt sugar clinging to the walls. You recognize the baker from yesterday morning, now stripped of his apron, his hands red and raw. He works without pause, pulling bricks one by one from the jagged hole that used to be his doorway. Beside him, a boy, maybe his son, passes each brick back to a waiting man, their motions perfectly in sync. You think about how many times those same hands must have passed loaves of bread instead. The rhythm of the work is strange, half frantic, half deliberate. Every so often, someone shouts, "Stop!" and everyone freezes, straining to hear. Sometimes it's nothing but the creak of shifting wood or the hiss of settling dust. But once you all hear it together, a faint, uneven knock from somewhere deep inside the pile. The group surges forward again, each movement sharper, faster. The tapping stops, but the digging doesn't. You move to help another team working on what was once a row of small houses. The air here is thicker with dust, and you wrap your scarf higher over your face. A woman crouches beside a gap in the rubble, speaking softly into it as though coaxing someone awake. You can't hear a reply, but her voice doesn't waver. It's the kind of voice you'd want to follow if you were lost in the dark. In one narrow alley, the debris is piled so high it nearly touches the windowsills of the second floor. People climb the heap like ants on a hill, using planks as ramps to slide heavier pieces down. The sound of scraping wood and shifting stone fills the air, punctuated by the occasional shout when a loose slab threatens to roll toward the crowd below. Every saved brick feels like a small victory, even if it reveals nothing beneath. By midday, your hands are blistered, the skin raw where the grit has rubbed through your gloves. You've found only fragments, a scrap of cloth, a bent cooking pot, a doll missing its head, but the work doesn't stop. No one talks about quitting. In the middle of so much loss, the act of digging feels like the only thing keeping the city from collapsing a second time. Not in stone, but in spirit. You're shifting debris from what used to be a two-story home when you hear it, faint, high-pitched, and startlingly clear. "Help! Help!" The voice is too sharp, too crisp to be muffled through rubble like a human cry would be. People around you freeze, heads turning toward the sound. It comes again, louder this time, with a rising urgency. "Help me!" The tone is almost mocking, and for a heartbeat, you think it's some cruel prank. Then someone whispers, "It's coming from inside." The group surges toward the noise, clearing bricks and splintered wood from what looks like the remains of a sitting room. A bright splash of green and yellow feathers appears in the dust. A parrot perched awkwardly on the bent frame of a toppled chair. Its cage lies shattered nearby, the door twisted open. The bird tilts its head, watching your every move, then says again, "Help me," as though directing the operation. The absurdity of it cuts through the heaviness in the air, and someone actually laughs. As you work, the bird doesn't stop talking. It shouts, "Hurry," when you slow down, and "Come on," when a beam proves too heavy for one person to lift. You can't tell if it's mimicking an owner's voice or improvising, but the commands keep everyone moving faster. Dust swirls around its bright plumage, making it look like a tiny flame burning in the gray ruin. One man mutters, "Bossiest survivor I've ever met," but there's no edge in his voice, just relief that something, anything, is alive in here. When the last of the debris is pulled away, the parrot hops down onto the arm of a woman kneeling nearby. She strokes its back gently, murmuring to it as if calming a frightened child. That's when you hear another sound, a weak cough from beneath the floorboards. The woman freezes, then shouts for tools. The parrot, as if understanding, starts pacing along the edge of the broken boards, squawking until two men pry them up. Beneath, curled in a shallow pocket of space, is an elderly man, his clothes coated in plaster dust. He blinks at the sudden light, then looks at the parrot and lets out a rasping laugh. "Told you he was loud enough," he says, his voice hoarse but steady. The woman helps him out, her arm firm under his, while the parrot flaps to his shoulder, ruffling its feathers like it's claiming victory. The group cheers quietly. Not the raucous kind of celebration you might expect, but a soft ripple of sound, like a sigh shared between strangers. It's not just about finding someone alive. It's about the strange, almost comic way it happened. The parrot bobs its head, clearly pleased, and someone jokes about making it the new commander of the rescue teams. Even in the middle of so much ruin, the image of that bright bird shouting orders will stick in your mind. As they lead the man away, the parrot turns once more toward the rubble, calling out, "Help me!" like a final reminder that there might still be others waiting. The sound lingers after they've gone, threading itself into the hum of voices and the scrape of shifting stone, a signal that hope can come from the most unexpected places. The smell of incense reaches you before you see them, a faint sweetness carried on the morning air, clinging strangely to the scent of dust and smoke. At first you think it's just residue from the collapsed churches, but then you notice the figures moving slowly through the ruins. Black cassocks streaked with gray, white collars dulled by grit, crucifixes glinting faintly in the weak sunlight. The priests walk in pairs, each carrying a small satchel, their steps deliberate, eyes scanning the wreckage for the living and the dying. They stop often, kneeling beside someone lying half buried in debris. Sometimes there's a flicker of movement, a breath or a twitch, and the priests call for help, their voices calm but urgent. Other times the stillness is absolute, and they begin the rite without hesitation. Latin murmurs rise into the air, the words steady and practiced, a rhythm that seems to float above the chaos. They make the sign of the cross with hands caked in dust, their fingers pausing briefly on each forehead as if memorizing the shape of the person beneath them. You watch one priest lean close to a young man whose chest barely moves. His lips form the words, "Ego te absolvo," while the other priest shields the man's face from falling grit with the fold of his sleeve. When the prayer ends, the young man exhales, a long, shuddering breath, and doesn't take another. The priest closes his eyes gently, brushing away a smear of blood from his cheek. There's no wailing, no collapse into grief. Only a soft murmur between the priests before they move to the next body. Not every encounter is final. At one site, a woman clutches the hand of a trapped man, while a priest kneels beside her, offering prayers for strength instead of release. The man's eyes open briefly, meeting the priest's, and a hint of a smile goes across his face. The priest nods, then helps the rescuers position their hands for leverage. In these moments, faith becomes as practical as any tool, a steadying presence in the middle of fear. The priest's satchels carry small glass bottles of holy water, a few folded linens, and tiny silver chalices. These humble objects catch the light like treasures, outshining the coins and jewelry scattered in the rubble. One priest uses a drop of water to trace a cross on a child's forehead, the gesture so gentle you barely see it until it's done. The child is breathing, but shallowly, and the priest rests a hand on her chest for a moment before moving on. All around, the normal noise of digging seems to quiet when the priests approach. Conversations soften, hammers pause mid-swing, as if the act of blessing demands its own space. Even those who muttered last night about divine punishment bow their heads now, the gravity of the moment outweighing old arguments. The prayers are not for judgment tonight. They are for release, for peace, for one last act of care in a place that has forgotten what safety feels like. You trail them for a while, your boots crunching on loose stone. It's strange, amid the toppled walls and smoke. Their pace is unhurried, almost serene, as if they've stepped into a different rhythm of time. Every stop is the same, a touch, a word, a crossing of the air. And when they finally vanish around a corner, their murmurs still seem to echo in your ears, soft and persistent, like the aftertaste of incense in the wind. Later in the day, as you pause to drink from a dented tin cup, you overhear a group of men standing near the edge of the square, their shovels leaning against a half-collapsed wall. They're not arguing about where to dig next. They're arguing about numbers. One swears the death toll has already passed 30,000. Another scoffs, saying that's just panic talking, that someone always doubles the count to make the disaster sound bigger. Fear likes round numbers, he says, but history will want proof. You realize it's not the first time you've heard this. Since the shaking stopped, rumors have carried casualty estimates that change with every telling. Some claim whole neighborhoods vanished, swallowed by the quake or the wave, leaving no one alive to verify. Others insist certain districts were spared entirely, and that the so-called losses are padded with names of people who simply fled and haven't come back. One man even mutters that the city's leaders might inflate the figures to draw more aid from foreign courts. Historians are still debating it, you'll later learn, arguing over parish records, letters from survivors, and foreign newspapers that couldn't agree on whether Lisbon had lost a quarter of its people or half. In this moment, though, the numbers feel less like statistics and more like ghosts. Each estimate is a shadow you can't confirm, but can almost see when you walk past a heap of rubble where voices used to be. A younger man, his hands still raw from digging, says quietly that it doesn't matter what the count is. The scale is already beyond understanding. He gestures toward the line of bodies laid out near the square, covered in cloth scavenged from the ruins. Does it change anything, he asks, if it's 30,000 or 50? The question hangs in the air, unanswered, as the others glance away toward the fires still smoldering in the distance. You think about how numbers will look on a page years from now. Neat, controlled, clean in a way that this day will never be. Somewhere in the future, someone will read a figure and imagine the disaster in a tidy way, not knowing how the dust choked the air or how the smell of smoke clung to every scrap of fabric. They'll see the number, but not the street where people shouted into the rubble until their voices went hoarse. One of the men insists that truth matters, even in grief. If we don't count them right, he says, we dishonor them twice, once by losing them, once by forgetting the real number. Another shakes his head, muttering that there's no way to count the ones who were carried out to sea, or buried so deep no shovel will ever reach them. The earth has its own census, he says grimly, and it doesn't share. As they pick up their tools again, the debate fizzles, not because they've reached agreement, but because the work in front of them feels more urgent than the record books of the future. The numbers will keep shifting long after the smoke clears. But for now, the only count that matters is how many voices are still calling out from under the ruins, and whether there's time left to answer them. By late afternoon, the hills beyond Lisbon look like they've been taken over by a strange, patchwork army. Bits of canvas, sails, market awnings, and even ripped-up bed sheets have been stretched between poles, lashed to tree trunks, or draped over crates to form makeshift tents. From a distance, the hillside glitters in uneven patches, some cloth still bright from dye, others dull and soot-streaked, each piece telling you exactly where it came from. The city has emptied upward, and now the hills are alive with the sounds of hammers, rope knots tightening, and the murmur of hundreds trying to make a place to exist. The ground here is uneven, but no one complains. Any slope or hollow that's clear of loose rock becomes a potential home. Families stake claims with whatever boundaries they can find. A line of overturned baskets, a circle of stones, even the shadow of a large tree. Children run between the half-built shelters, carrying messages or scavenged bits of fabric, their bare feet stirring the dust. Every so often, a sharp gust of wind threatens to lift a tent straight off the hillside, sending its owners scrambling to hold it down. Near the crest, you see a large shelter made from what must have been an enormous ship sail. The fabric still carries the faint smell of salt and tar, and the edges ripple like a flag in the breeze. Beneath it, a group of women sit on blankets, mending clothes and talking in low voices. One hums a lullaby while threading a needle, her voice steady despite the chaos below. The song drifts outward, threading itself through the flapping of canvas and the occasional clang of a hammer. Elsewhere, men work together to raise taller structures using salvage beams. They wedge the supports deep into the earth, testing each one with a solid shove before tying the fabric overhead. The ropes are scavenged from docks, from market stalls, even from beds torn apart in the rush to flee. The knots are messy, but they hold. One man stands back to admire his handiwork and mutters something about it being earthquake-proof, drawing a tired laugh from the others. In between the tents, small fires burn in shallow pits, the smoke rising in pale ribbons toward the darkening sky. People cluster around them to boil water or heat what food they've managed to keep. The smell of charred bread and salted fish drifts downwind, mixing with the sharper scent of fresh pine from hastily cut support poles. At night, these fires will become the new street lamps, dotting the hillsides with tiny circles of light. There's no privacy here, no real separation between one family and the next. Conversations bleed into each other, and disputes over space are settled quickly. No one wants to draw too much attention. Still, there's a strange comfort in the closeness. You hear strangers calling each other by name after only a few hours of acquaintance, offering scraps of food or helping to tie down a sagging corner of canvas. Disaster has made neighbors out of everyone. From your spot partway up the slope, you can see the city below, still hazy with smoke. The streets look quiet from this distance, but you know that beneath the calm exterior, there's movement. Rescuers digging, fires smoldering, walls leaning in ways that promise future collapses. Up here, the hills feel safer, but not untouched. The ground still trembles now and then, making the tent poles creak and the fires hiss as embers shift. As night falls, the hills come alive with a different kind of noise. Soft voices, the rustle of fabric, the occasional burst of laughter. It's not the life Lisbon knew yesterday, but it's life all the same. And for now, these uneven slopes and patched-together shelters will be the city's new walls. Down near the base of the hills, where the ground levels out into a wide strip of open dirt, a different kind of work is underway. Merchants, faces still smudged with soot, clothes torn from the day's chaos, are already rebuilding their market stalls, not from fresh lumber, but from the bones of wrecked ships that the river has spat back onto shore. Long planks still smell of brine and pitch, some bearing scorch marks from the fires that reach the docks. Nails are pulled from twisted frames and hammered back into place with whatever tools can be borrowed or improvised. One man balances on an overturned crate, holding a timber steady while his son hammers at the base. The boy's swing is too wide, the nail bending sideways with a dull ping. But no one scolds him. They just pull it free, straighten it on a rock, and try again. The work is slow, but the rhythm is steady. Lift, place, hammer, repeat. Each stall begins as a crude skeleton, nothing more than a rectangle of beams. But even that outline draws curious eyes from passers-by. A fishmonger you recognize from before the quake is assembling his counter from a ship's broken mast. The wood is too curved to fit cleanly, so he props it at an angle and declares it artistic. His hands move automatically, muscle memory guiding the placement of each board. Beside him, a woman lays out a strip of sailcloth for a roof, weighing the edges down with chunks of stone. "It'll keep the sun off, if nothing else," she says, tugging it tight. Not everything is built to sell goods. One stall goes up purely to store salvage, a jumble of tools, rope, and barrels too heavy to carry farther uphill. Another becomes a place for boiling water, the steam rising from a battered copper pot perched over a ring of stones. People stop to warm their hands over it, grateful for the heat even without tea or soup inside. The merchants don't chase them away. They know warmth is a currency of its own right now. The smell of sawdust and salt water hangs in the air, mingling with the faint odor of tar from the ship timbers. Every so often, the sound of hammering is joined by the creak of a plank being forced into place, or the rasp of a saw biting into damp wood. It's not the chorus of a normal market day, but it has the same kind of promise, noise that means something is being built, Something will exist tomorrow that doesn't exist today. Children wander between the half-finished stalls, fingers trailing along the rough wood. One girl finds a carving on a plank, letters in a language she doesn't know, and asks her father what it means. He shrugs, says it was probably the ship's name, then nails the plank into place without another word. The carving will stay there, a silent reminder that this stall once crossed an ocean before it came here. By late afternoon, the row of makeshift stalls cast long shadows across the dirt. They're crooked, uneven, and patched in ways no carpenter would approve of, but they stand. The merchants lean on their counters, surveying their work with a tired sort of pride. Tomorrow, or maybe the next day, goods will fill these spaces again. Bread, fish, cloth, whatever can be found. For now, the timber and nails are enough. It's not just about selling, it's about proving that commerce, like the city itself, can claw its way back from the water and the fire. In the middle of all this rebuilding, one stall stops you in your tracks. Not because it's better built than the others, but because of what's on the counter. A row of small clay pots, each sealed with wax, lined up neatly like precious ointments. The merchant, a wiry man with a sunburned face and a salesman's grin, catches your eye and waves you over. "Protection from the sun," he says proudly, tapping one of the pots. You expect olive oil, maybe beeswax mixed with herbs. Then he adds crocodile dung, finest in Lisbon. And for a moment you think he's joking, but no one else laughs. The man lifts a lid and holds it under your nose. The smell hits first, earthy, sour, with a strange tang that makes you take a step back. He nods seriously. The Egyptians used it, keeps the skin cool, stops the burning. He gestures toward the hills where people are pitching tents under a merciless sun. Better than roasting like a chicken, he adds, as if that seals the deal. You watch as a woman hesitates, then hands over a small coin for a pot. She dips 2 fingers in, smears the paste across her cheeks, and winces. Not from pain, but from the smell. Still, she nods in satisfaction, muttering something about it being cheaper than a wide-brimmed hat. The merchant beams, clearly delighted to have a satisfied customer. He tells her to reapply every time the sun moves a hand's width, which sounds more like a superstition than medical advice. The odd thing is, business isn't bad. Word spreads quickly and soon a small line forms. People lean in to sniff, grimace, and then, more often than not, buy. Whether they actually believe it works or just want to try something ancient and strange, you can't tell. A man jokes that if it doesn't stop sunburn, it'll at least keep everyone else far enough away not to notice. The merchant laughs too, but doesn't deny it. He shows you his stock room, which is just a wooden crate filled with more clay pots. Each is marked with a scratch symbol that he claims means blessing of the Nile. Whether that's true or just good marketing, it gives the little jars a sense of mystery. He says he traded for the supply weeks ago, never expecting it to become his best-selling item after the quake. Hard times make people try strange things, he shrugs. As you step away, you catch sight of 2 children smearing the paste on each other's arms, giggling and pretending to be crocodiles. Their mother shakes her head but doesn't stop them. Maybe because it's the first time they've laughed all day. The smell drifts after you as you walk on, mingling with the sharper scent of tar and wood from the other stalls. It's a ridiculous detail in the middle of so much ruin, but it sticks with you. In a city rebuilding from fire, water, and stone, someone is making a living selling jars of crocodile dung, and people are buying. Maybe it's survival, maybe it's hope, or maybe it's just proof that even when the ground won't stop shaking, human beings will still find a way to set up shop. At the far end of the hillside camp, away from the noisy bustle of the market stalls, a small group sits hunched over makeshift tables, planks balanced on barrels, weighted down with stones to keep the wind from stealing their work. These aren't merchants or laborers. They're engineers, draftsmen, and a few architects who managed to escape the city with their tools. Their hands are stained with charcoal, their sleeves rolled up, eyes fixed on large sheets of paper, covered with careful lines and numbers. One man uses a ruler to mark out a series of rectangles, muttering about modular designs to the woman beside him. She nods, then sketches a pattern of diagonal braces inside each rectangle, explaining how they'll keep the walls from folding in the next time the ground moves. Another draws a grid for foundations, noting that shallow trenches and flexible joints might absorb shock better than rigid stone. The words earthquake-proof are never spoken out loud, but they hang in the air like a promise. People wander over to watch, drawn by the novelty of seeing something being built on paper before it's built in the dirt. The engineers answer questions patiently, though some of the explanations sail right over their audience's heads. They talk about load distribution, tensile strength, and the way roofs can be made lighter without leaking. One woman suggests incorporating shipbuilding techniques. After all, ships survive storms by flexing with the waves. A young apprentice scribbles the idea down in the corner of his sketch. The tools are primitive, straight edges cut from salvaged wood, compasses made from bent wire, even pencils sharpened with knives. But the drawings take shape with surprising speed. You watch as one plan evolves from a simple square into a sturdy little house with evenly spaced windows, a sloped roof, and walls reinforced by timber frames. It's nothing like the grand stone facades that crumbled in the quake. It looks lighter, smarter, almost humble. Occasionally, the group stops to consult a small stack of books, dog-eared volumes rescued from an office or library. The pages are smudged with soot, but the diagrams inside are clear enough to copy. One engineer sketches from memory, explaining that he studied building methods in far-off colonies where tremors were common. They build for the ground they stand on, he says, not for the sky they hope to reach. A few children sit cross-legged nearby, watching the pencils dance across the paper. One boy asks if the new houses will fall down too. The woman with the diagonal braces smiles gently and says, "Maybe not." That's the point of trying. It's not a promise, just a possibility, but it's enough to make the boy nod and keep watching. As the sun dips lower, the wind catches one of the finished sketches and tries to pull it from the table. The man with the ruler slaps a hand over it, then weighs it down with a stone. He grins at the near miss, rolling the sheet carefully before tucking it into a canvas tube. Each drawing is treated like gold, something portable, unburnable, and capable of shaping the city's future. When you walk away, you glance back to see them still bent over their work, the fading light turning their papers golden. In a day filled with ruin, the sight of a line becoming a wall, a roof, a home feels like a kind of rebellion. They're not just sketching buildings. They're sketching the idea that Lisbon can stand again, this time on legs that won't give way so easily. By the second week, the smell of the city has changed. The sharp tang of smoke is fading, but in its place comes something heavier, sweeter in the worst way. A smell that clings to the back of your throat and makes people avoid the wind when it blows from certain streets. It's the reason so many have come here, to the outskirts, where the ground is soft enough to dig and the air is just clean enough to breathe. The hills that used to be grazing land are now lined with rows of shallow trenches, each one a final resting place for people whose names may never be known. You stand at the edge of one such trench, the dirt piled high beside it, watching as men with shovels work in silence. There's no ceremony at first, only the thud of earth breaking and the creak of wooden cartwheels bringing more bodies from the city. The carts are covered in canvas, but the outlines underneath are unmistakable. Volunteers move carefully, lifting each bundle down and laying it side by side with the others, arranging them so the lines are neat. It's the only order left in a week of chaos. Eventually, a priest steps forward, his cassock smudged from days of this work. He raises his hands and begins the prayers, the Latin words rolling out steady and practiced. People bow their heads, not just the families who know someone in the trench, but strangers too, because grief here is no longer private. Some clutch rosaries, others hold nothing but each other. You find your own hands curling into fists without thinking, the dirt pressing into your palms. When the prayers end, the first shovelfuls of earth fall. The sound is hollow, almost metallic against the canvas. A woman near you flinches and presses her sleeve to her mouth. The shovels move faster then, the rhythm mechanical, because lingering over this part makes it harder. Dust rises from the fresh dirt, caught in the low sunlight, and for a moment it almost looks like smoke again. Further down the row, another trench is being prepared. The workers there joke quietly between themselves. Not out of disrespect, but because the silence would be too heavy without it. One man says the ground here is easier to dig than in the city, and another replies that maybe the earth knew it would be needed. The joke earns a few tired smiles before they return to their shovels. As the sun lowers, shadows stretch across the field, and the air grows colder. Families step forward to leave tokens on the fresh mounds. Flowers scavenge from fallen gardens, a piece of ribbon, a tiny carved figure. One boy sets down a clay whistle, the kind sold in the markets before the quake. He doesn't play it, just leaves it resting on the soil before walking away without looking back. By the time the last trench is covered, the workers' shoulders are slumped, their shovels resting in the dirt like tired sentinels. The priest makes one final sign of the cross over the field, his voice hoarse now, and then the people begin to drift back toward the tent city. Behind them, the fresh earth lies in perfect rows, a map of absence just outside the city that still burns. The next morning, you follow a narrow path down toward a stretch of open ground where the city's survivors gather in uneasy silence. Here, under a long line of tattered awnings, bodies recovered from the ruins are laid out in rows, each wrapped in cloth but with the face uncovered, if the face has survived. The smell is faint but insistent, enough to keep people shifting their feet, holding kerchiefs to their mouths. This is where families come to search for the missing, hoping for recognition and dreading it at the same time. People move slowly down the line, as if afraid that walking too quickly will make someone they love appear too soon. Some pause for long minutes, leaning close, brushing away dust or smoothing a lock of hair, trying to see through the damage to the familiar. Others stop only long enough to shake their heads and move on. Every so often, a cry breaks through the murmurs, a sharp, short sound that makes everyone nearby freeze before the grieving begins in earnest. One woman kneels beside a young man's body, tracing the curve of his jaw with her fingers. She speaks to him softly, almost like scolding, as though he could still explain why he didn't make it out. A boy, no older than 12, stands behind her with his arms stiff at his sides, staring at the ground. When the woman finally stands, she doesn't look at the priest, who steps forward to mark the body's name in a small ledger. She just walks away without another word, the boy trailing after her. In another row, an older man carries a small sketch, charcoal on paper, smudged and creased from being handled too often. He compares it to each uncovered face, squinting, stepping back, stepping forward again. The sketch is of a woman, her hair pulled back and her mouth turned in a half smile. When he finally stops, it's not because he's found her, it's because the last face isn't hers either. He folds the sketch carefully and tucks it back inside his coat before walking away, still searching. Some families bring tokens to help identify their missing. A piece of embroidered cloth, a distinctive ring, a scrap of ribbon dyed an uncommon blue. They check the hands, the clothes, the small details that might have survived where names and voices did not. Volunteers with ledgers move from body to body, recording these details for the official lists, though you hear some mutter that the lists are already too long to be accurate. Children are kept back, but not always successfully. A little girl slips past her older brother and runs to one of the rows, crouching beside a woman's body. She touches the woman's cheek, then pulls her hand back quickly, as if the cold surprised her. The brother lifts her away, holding her tightly as she starts to cry. The priest nearby doesn't stop them. He just lowers his head until they've gone. By midday, the crowd has thinned, though a few linger at the edges, unable or unwilling to leave without answers. The awnings flap gently in the breeze, casting moving shadows over the still forms beneath them. Somewhere, a hammer strikes wood as more coffins are built for those who've been claimed. For the rest, the search will continue tomorrow and the day after, until the city decides it can no longer wait for names. Late in the afternoon, a murmur runs through the identification tent, a ripple of voices that makes people stand taller, crane their necks, edge closer to one particular spot in the row of bodies. Someone whispers that they found him, though no one says who him is at first. You move nearer, curiosity pulling you through the shifting crowd until you see the figure. A man wrapped in a fine wool coat, the kind that only merchants or minor nobles can afford. His boots are polished, his hair combed neatly despite the dust. The talk spreads quickly. Some swear it's Senor Duarte, a wealthy ship owner known for hosting lavish dinners on his terrace overlooking the harbor. Others insist it's Councilor Ramos, the one who famously opposed the new tax on imported wine. Each person adds a detail to the story. He was seen leaving the city before the quake. He was trapped in his study. He was helping at the docks when the wave came. The certainty in their voices makes you almost believe it too. A clerk with an official ledger hurries over, flipping pages and asking for confirmation from those who claim to know him. But here's the problem. Every supposed witness saw him in a different place that day. No one can agree on his height, his voice, even the color of his eyes. Still, the crowd leans in, treating the body as if it's already been named. Someone mutters about sending word to the man's family. Another says the funeral will be attended by half the city. Just as the clerk dips his pen to record the name, a woman pushes her way forward, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. She studies the man's face for a long moment, then shakes her head. "That's not Senor Duarte," she says flatly. "And it's certainly not Ramos." Her voice cuts clean through the speculation, and the crowd falls quiet. She explains that the man is wearing boots made for the military, not the merchant's trade, and that the stitching on his coat is the kind done in Porto, not Lisbon. The clerk freezes, his pen hovering above the page. Slowly he asks if she knows who the man is. The woman hesitates, then admits she doesn't, only that she knows who he isn't. With that, the certainty evaporates. People begin to drift away, embarrassed by how quickly they'd claim the story as truth. The body remains unclaimed, just another figure in the long row, stripped of the importance the crowd had given him only minutes earlier. You watch as the clerk scratches out the half-written name in his ledger, leaving a blank space where the man's identity should be. Later, when you pass by again, the body has been moved to a quieter corner, the fine coat still buttoned neatly, the boots still polished. Whoever he was, he'll be buried without the titles and stories that had momentarily clung to him. The city will remember the rumor far longer than it remembers the truth. That evening, as the sun dips low over the tent city, you find yourself near a small campfire where a handful of men and women sit with ledgers and scraps of paper spread out between them. Their clothes are plain, their ink-stained fingers tapping restlessly against their knees. These are not the rescue workers or the priests. You realize they're record keepers, city clerks, and even a few scholars who somehow salvaged their notes from the wreckage. And right now they're arguing. One man, his spectacles slightly bent, insists that the official death toll, already printed in broadsheets sent to other cities, is wildly exaggerated. 50,000 dead, he scoffs. We've barely recovered half that many bodies. He flips open a ledger to show neat columns of names, each cross-marked when confirmed. Numbers, he says, must match reality or history will record a lie. Across from him, a woman in a soot-streaked dress leans forward, her voice sharp but controlled. Bodies aren't the whole count, she says. What about the ones swept out to sea? The ones buried so deep no one will find them? Or those who left and will never return? She jabs a finger at his ledger. If we aim low, we dishonor the scale of what happened here. The discussion circles, growing more heated. One clerk suggests the higher number is meant to encourage aid from foreign courts. A disaster that sounds smaller may not open as many purses. Another claims that fear thrives on big, round figures, and the leaders are feeding it to maintain control over the restless population. They talk about politics, about pity, about whether truth even survives in times like this. You listen, fascinated, as they pull examples from other cities and other centuries. Plagues that killed hundreds on paper, but thousands in the streets. Floods that were downplayed to protect trade routes. Fires whose damage grew larger with every retelling. Historians are still debating, one mutters, as if already picturing future scholars sitting in a quiet library, weighing the same arguments over this quake. At one point, a young man who's been silent until now speaks up. His voice is quiet, but it cuts through the chatter. Does it matter if it's 30,000 or 50? He asks. We can't feel the difference. We can only feel the loss. For a moment, the group falls silent. Someone tosses another piece of wood on the fire, and the flames flare high, illuminating faces that look older than they did a week ago. The debate eventually fizzles, not because anyone has won, but because they all seem to realize there's no final answer yet. They gather their papers, tucking them into satchels, each convinced their own count will be the one history remembers. As they drift back into the maze of tents, the fire's glow fades, leaving only the sound of the wind pushing against the canvas and the quiet, uncountable breathing of a city that's still alive. 3 weeks after the quake, word spreads through the camp like a gust of wind. The king is coming. At first, no one believes it. Royalty doesn't stroll into a city still coughing up dust. But by midday, the sound of hoofbeats rolls in from the North Road. And there he is, flanked by guards in tarnished armor, their horses picking their way carefully over cracked stones. The king sits tall in the saddle, his dark coat embroidered, but not ostentatious. A strip of black cloth tied around his arm in mourning. The crowd parts slowly as he enters the ruined streets, people watching from doorways with guarded faces. Some bow, others just stare. He rides past the collapsed church, the shattered market square, the blackened shells of houses. You can see him taking it all in. The sagging beams, the smell of burnt grain, the silence where a city's heartbeat should be. He doesn't speak at first, but his eyes linger on the places where children play in the rubble, chasing each other through what used to be their neighbors' gardens. At the riverfront, he dismounts. The guards step forward, but he waves them back and walks toward the scorched remains of the docks. Here, a few fishermen still work, hauling in nets from boats that somehow survived. The king kneels beside one, inspecting the frayed rope and the meager catch. "How many can you feed with this?" he asks quietly. The fisherman shrugs. "Half as many as yesterday." As they move deeper into the ruined quarter, survivors begin to call out. Not titles or formal greetings, but requests. Bread for the children. More water. A roof before the rains come. The king listens, his brow furrowing, and you can almost see the weight settling on his shoulders. He stops to speak with a woman cooking over an open fire, asking how long she's been here, how many mouths she feeds. She tells him, without ceremony, that she lost 3 children and her home, but still has her hands, so she'll keep cooking. Near the base of the hill, he pauses to look up at the sprawling tent city. "They're living in canvas while the stones wait to fall again," he says to one of his ministers, the words carrying farther than he probably intended. The minister writes something in a small book, the scratch of the quill audible in the quiet. Before leaving, the king gathers a small crowd and speaks. Not a grand speech, just a promise that rebuilding will begin soon, that no one will be left without shelter. Whether the people believe him is another matter. As he mounts his horse, you notice a smear of dust on his glove, and you wonder if he'll keep it there as a reminder or wipe it away before he reaches the palace. The hoofbeats fade as he rides out the same way he came, leaving behind the same cracked streets, the same sagging tents, but also maybe a thin thread of hope that someone powerful has seen this ruin and won't forget it. The day after the king's visit, a group gathers in the largest of the canvas tents, its walls bulging with the weight of too many people inside. The air smells faintly of ink and damp wool, and a small oil lamp flickers in the center, casting long shadows over the tables. Here, survivors aren't mending nets or cooking soup. They're drafting words meant to move a monarch. Sheets of rough paper are spread out like maps, covered in careful script, and the occasional ink blot where a quill paused too long. At the head of the table, an older merchant with a voice like gravel reads aloud the first lines. "To His Most Faithful Majesty, we, the humble citizens of Lisbon." The words sound stiff, almost brittle, but everyone listens closely. He continues, describing the destruction in plain but deliberate detail. How the market is gone, how the wells are fouled, how the rain will turn the tent city into mud. His tone carries no begging, only the weight of necessity. Beside him, a young seamstress leans forward, suggesting they add a section about the orphans. How many have been counted? How many more remain unaccounted for? A priest nods and offers to provide exact figures from the parish registers. Someone else insists they mention the fire brigades, many of whom died in the quake and left the city defenseless against future blazes. The discussion grows louder, voices overlapping as each person insists their own hardship deserves mention. At one point, a fisherman suggests including a demand for lower taxes on food imports until the next harvest. The merchant at the head of the table raises an eyebrow but doesn't dismiss the idea. "We can't rebuild if we can't eat," the fisherman says simply, and the others murmur in agreement. A scribe begins adding the point to the margin, his hand moving quickly before the ink runs dry. As the petition takes shape, the mood shifts from cautious to determined. They debate not only what to ask for, but how to phrase it so the king cannot easily refuse. The seamstress warns against flattery that sounds hollow. The priest reminds them that respect must be shown if they want an answer. The merchant, surprisingly patient, mediates between the two, smoothing the rough edges of their arguments into something that reads like unity. By evening, the final draft is ready. The merchant reads it aloud one last time, his gravelly voice steady even when he speaks of the thousands dead and the thousands more in danger. When he finishes, there's a moment of silence before each person steps forward to sign. Some write their full names, others can only make a mark, guided by the scribe's hand. Still, each signature feels like a small act of ownership over the future they're demanding. Tomorrow, a small delegation will carry the petition to the palace. Whether it will be read immediately or filed away in some quiet office is anyone's guess. But tonight, under the dim light of the oil lamp, the survivors leave the tent with the sense that they've done more than just survive another day. They've spoken together in a voice the king cannot entirely ignore. By the end of the week, whispers start threading through the camp like smoke. They begin in the market stalls, tucked between the clink of coins and the rustle of canvas, then drift into the cooking fires and water lines. The story is always the same, though the source changes with every telling. The king is considering moving the capital, not just for a few months while Lisbon rebuilds, but permanently. At first, the idea feels absurd. This is Lisbon, the beating heart of the empire, the port that swallows and spits out the wealth of half the known world. You can't simply pack that up and set it down somewhere else, but the more you listen, the more the reasons sound plausible. The city is broken, the ground unstable, the port too damaged to handle the trade it once did. Inland towns escaped the quake's wrath entirely, and some already have the fortifications and space to grow into something grand. Around the fire one night, a carpenter says he's heard the king's ministers prefer Coimbra. High ground, solid stone, safer from both waves and tremors. A woman selling fish insists it will be Porto because the merchants there have deep pockets and deeper influence. Someone else claims the king has already ordered a survey of several sites, though no one can name who conducted it. The rumors spark different reactions. Some people seem relieved at the idea, imagining a smaller Lisbon where they can rebuild without the crush of royal politics. Others are furious, seeing the move as an abandonment of the city's history, its pride, its identity. One old sailor spits into the dirt and growls, "A capital's not just buildings, it's the bones under the streets. You can't sail away from that." As the days pass, you notice that officials from the palace avoid answering questions about the capital's future. They smile, they change the subject, they talk about reconstruction efforts and food supplies, but they never say no. That silence only feeds the speculation, twisting it into certainty for some. By the week's end, the rumor has taken on the weight of inevitability. People begin to speak of it as though it's already happened. When the king leaves, when the court moves north, a few even start making plans to follow the royal court if it does relocate, convinced that opportunity travels in the shadow of power. You can't tell whether any of it's true, but the thought settles into your mind like a splinter. The quake may have shattered walls and streets, but this would shatter the heart, and in some ways that feels like a deeper wound. In a half-collapsed warehouse near the waterfront, a group of merchants gathers around a long table made from two doors laid across barrels. Sunlight filters through the broken roof, striping their faces with light and shadow. The smell of salt and smoke hangs in the air, mixed with the faint tang of spilled wine that's soaked into the floorboards. They've come here to make a choice that will decide not just their own futures, but the shape of the city itself. One man, broad-shouldered and wearing a coat patched at the elbows, argues for moving his business north. "The port's gone," he says, slapping his palm against the table. "The ships can't dock, the warehouses are rubble, and the roads inland are worse. We can start fresh in Porto or even further upriver before we lose everything." His words hang in the air, daring someone to challenge them. A spice trader with silver rings on every finger leans forward, shaking her head. "You'll lose more by leaving. Our clients know where to find us, here. If we scatter, we give that business to someone else. And when Lisbon recovers, and it will, they won't need us anymore." She lets the rings catch the light as if proof of her point lies in their glint. Another merchant, younger than the rest, flips open a ledger thick with smudged ink. He points to the numbers showing debts owed and shipments canceled. We can't wait for someday, he says quietly. If we stay, we drown in losses. If we go, at least we swim. The older ones exchange glances, some nodding, some frowning. The debate moves in circles, touching on every fear and every hope. Someone brings up the rumor about the king moving the capital, and voices rise again. If the court leaves, the gold leaves, one man insists. And when the gold leaves, so do the buyers. Others counter that Lisbon's location, its access to the sea, to trade routes, will always draw ships back, no matter what the court decides. Eventually, they turn to practicalities. Rebuilding here means higher costs, importing stone, hiring laborers who will demand more pay after risking their lives in the rubble. Moving means finding new property, bribing local officials, and starting over in markets already claimed by competitors. No option is easy. Both carry the taste of risk. As the meeting drags on, tempers flare. The broad-shouldered man slams his fist down again, while the spice trader mutters under her breath about cowards running from opportunity. The younger merchant closes his ledger and stares at the floor, as if the numbers there might rearrange themselves into an answer. By the time the sun begins to set, nothing is decided. Some leave determined to pack up and go. Others linger, making quiet promises to hold the city together. The table remains, its surface scratched with marks from coins, cups, and fists, a record of an argument that may decide whether Lisbon rises again as a center of trade or becomes just another port remembered in the margins of history. By the start of the fourth week, the central square looks less like the heart of a city and more like the inside of a collapsed warehouse. Piles of broken stone block the pathways, roof tiles are stacked in unstable towers, and a fallen statue of some long-forgotten general lies face down in the mud, like he's decided to nap through the apocalypse. The air is thick with dust that swirls in slow spirals whenever the wind cuts across the open space. Somewhere under all this, people keep saying, is the plaza. The place where the market stalls once made the air smell of oranges and roast chestnuts. The work begins at sunrise. Men with shovels and crowbars form lines, passing debris hand to hand, the sound of stone clacking together echoing off the damaged buildings. It's tedious work. For every boulder moved, 3 smaller rocks roll into its place. A pair of women haul buckets of broken glass to a growing mound at the edge of the square, the sunlight catching the shards and scattering light like a pile of dangerous jewels. No one is paid for this. There's no money to pay with, but everyone knows the square has to be cleared if the city's going to breathe again. An older man in a battered hat claims he remembers where the fountain stood. Right about here, he says, planting his foot on a patch of packed earth. Others argue it was further left, near where the statue's head now rests. They debate for a few minutes, gesturing at invisible landmarks only they can see. Eventually, they agree to dig in both spots, joking that whoever finds the fountain gets to keep the first coin they find in it. The joke lands well enough to earn a few tired smiles. By midday, they've uncovered half of the statue's torso and managed to shift it upright, though the general is now missing both arms. Someone props a broom in one of the empty sockets, declaring him ready for duty again. Laughter ripples through the workers, brief but welcome. The moment passes quickly as they return to the heavier work, but it's the first time in days the sound of laughter has carried across the square. A group of boys too young to lift stones runs messages between the workers and the tent city. They dart through the rubble with the ease of stray cats, carrying notes for extra tools or water. One stops to watch as a team uncovers a patch of patterned stone, part of the old plaza floor. The design is worn but still visible, looping vines carved into pale marble. The boy traces one curve with his finger before being shooed away by a worker. As the sun lowers, the pile of rubble at the edge of the square is taller than a man, but so is the cleared space in the center. For the first time since the quake, you can stand there and see a stretch of open ground wide enough for a market stall or two. The site is small, almost insignificant against the ruin around it, but the workers pause to take it in. A woman wipes her forehead with the back of her hand and says quietly, "Feels like we're winning a little." When the day ends, the tools are stacked neatly, ready for tomorrow. The broom still juts from the statue's shoulder, a silent guard over the square. As you leave, you glance back and almost see the place as it once was. Alive, noisy, crowded, almost. 2 days after the first open space appears in the central square, a small group of traders shows up before dawn with carts and baskets. They don't wait for an official order or permission. There's no one left to give those. Instead, they start staking out spots on the cleared ground, driving wooden posts into the dirt and stretching scraps of canvas for shade. The sound of hammers rings out in the quiet morning, mixing with the calls of gulls circling overhead. The first stall to go up belongs to a fruit seller, her table made from a door balanced on crates. She lays out apples that are slightly bruised, bunches of grapes, and a few hard pears. The display is modest, but after weeks of nothing but bread and fish stew, the colors alone draw people in. She smiles at each passerby, telling them to look now, buy later if they're not ready to spend. Next comes a man selling salted cod, its sharp smell cutting through the square. He hangs the fish from a rope strung between two poles, the silver scales flashing in the sunlight. People approach hesitantly, not because of the smell, but because they can't quite believe a market could exist again so soon. He grins, telling them the fish came from waters that still trust the city. Whether that's meant as poetry or a sales pitch is anyone's guess. A cloth merchant sets up beside them, unrolling bolts of faded fabric salvaged from a warehouse. She shakes the dust from each one before folding it neatly, her hands moving with the same precision they did before the quake. A few women run their fingers over the material, testing its strength, murmuring about making curtains or dresses when the time feels right again. By midday, the square smells faintly of spices, fish, and fruit. The sound of bargaining, gentle at first, then more confident, floats in the air. Children weave between the stalls, peeking at the goods and sometimes being handed a bruised apple or a twist of cloth for free. The traders don't seem to mind. They know this first day is as much about hope as it is about profit. A man passing through stops to watch the scene and shakes his head with a smile. You clear a space, and people will fill it, he says to no one in particular. And he's right. By the time the sun leans westward, the square feels less like a graveyard of stone and more like a place where life could take root again. As the traders pack up for the evening, they talk about tomorrow. Who will bring bread? Who will bring herbs? Whether they can find more canvas for shade. No one says it outright, but you can feel it. This isn't just about selling things. It's about proving to themselves and to the city that commerce, conversation, and community can grow even in the cracks left by disaster. A week into the market's revival, a new argument takes hold in the square. Not about prices or trade routes, but about stones. More specifically, about whether certain ruins should be left standing as reminders of the quake, or cleared away entirely. It starts when a city official, his coat dusty but his voice still carrying the weight of authority, points to the shattered remains of the old clock tower. We'll bring it down next, he announces, as if it's already decided. That's when an older woman, wrapped in a faded shawl, speaks up. You can't, she says firmly. That tower's the last thing left of the old square. My husband proposed to me under its shadow. A few bystanders nod, murmuring in agreement. Someone else adds that the tower's bell, though cracked, was the sound that called people to safety after the quake, its toll echoing even as the fires burned. The official counters that the structure is unstable, a hazard to anyone nearby. One strong wind and it comes down on its own, he warns. A younger man who's been selling bread in the market laughs dryly. Then at least it falls as it stood, without you turning it into rubble for bricks. The tension between them is sharp enough to draw a small crowd. Soon the debate widens. A teacher argues that leaving certain ruins intact will give future generations a place to learn about the quake, to see the scars for themselves. A carpenter scoffs, saying those stones are better used to rebuild homes. People can't live inside a memory, he says, wiping sawdust from his hands. You listen as the arguments circle, both sides making sense in their own way. The official mentions safety again, but now he's softer, as if he understands he's not just talking about stones. The woman in the shawl suggests reinforcing the tower instead of tearing it down. Let it stand, but make it safe, she says. We've lost too much to lose the face of our city, too. In the end, no decision is made that day. The market resumes its hum, but people keep glancing toward the clock tower, as if waiting to see whether it will survive the week. The cracked bell still hangs above, catching the light in a way that makes you think it might ring again. just once before the city decides its fate. The idea begins almost as a joke. A fishmonger, tired of packing up early to beat the sunset, mutters that they should just bring lanterns and keep selling until the moon takes over. By the next day, someone's done exactly that, stringing a line of mismatched oil lamps across 2 poles in the center of the square. When the sun drops, the lamps flare to life, casting pockets of warm light over the stalls. The shadows stretch long and soft, and for the first time in weeks, the square feels more like a gathering place than a worksite. People drift in from the tent city, curious and cautious. The fruit seller lays out apples that gleam gold in the lamplight. The spice merchant shakes cinnamon into the air, letting the scent mingle with the salt from the fish stalls. Children chase each other between the pools of light, their laughter carrying farther in the cool night air than it ever does in the heat of day. A man with a battered guitar appears, strumming softly at first, then with more confidence as a few voices join in. The music is rough but warm, weaving between the chatter of bargaining and the clink of coins. A woman selling cloth wraps a strip of blue linen around her shoulders and starts dancing in slow, easy steps, drawing a ring of onlookers. In one corner, an old baker surprises everyone by showing up with a basket of small sweet rolls, their tops dusted with sugar. He hands them out for free, saying only, "First night deserves a treat." The rolls vanish in minutes, leaving sticky smiles and a chorus of thanks. The square becomes something different under the lamps, a place where survival isn't the only goal. People linger at stalls just to talk, to swap stories of what they remember from before the quake, and to imagine what might come next. Even the traders seem reluctant to close, their voices softer, their movements slower, as though they know this moment can't last forever. When the lamps finally burn low, no one rushes to leave. The crowd thins gradually, like a tide retreating from shore, leaving behind the faint smell of cinnamon, smoke, and sugared bread. As you walk away, you glance back at the dim glow still clinging to the square and realize it's not the light that matters tonight. It's the fact that people chose to stand together in it. And now the lamps in the square fade to embers. The voices drift into silence, and Lisbon curls back into the darkness. Its streets still breathing smoke, its ruins still whispering to the sea. You've walked with me from the moment the ground split open to the first night someone dared to sell sugared bread under the stars. The city is standing, but only just. If you've made it this far, you're part of the story now. So tell me, if your city vanished in a single morning, would you rebuild or walk away? Drop your answer in the comments and rate this disaster on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being a mild inconvenience, 10 being, I'm sleeping under the stars with a cracked bell for company. Hit like, subscribe if you truly want more nights like this, and share it with someone who loves a good ruin. Good night, peaceful dreaming of forgotten streets. See you in the dust of history.